They said a mail-order bride was nothing but property, disposable, worthless, meant to serve and suffer in silence. When Lydia Rowan was beaten and thrown from a stagecoach in the Arizona dust, left to die under the hungry eyes of predators, she learned that truth the hard way. But one man, a silent rancher with ghosts in his eyes and a colt on his hip, stepped forward and gave her the one thing no one else had, a choice. This is their story. Stay with me until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled across the world. The Arizona sun had no mercy. It beat down on the dusty road leading into Copper Ridge like a hammer on an anvil, turning the air thick and shimmering, making the distant mountains waver like mirages. The stagecoach that thundered into town that afternoon kicked up clouds of red dust that hung in the air long after the wheels stopped turning, coating everything. The hitching posts, the wooden sidewalks, the faces of curious onlookers in a fine, gritty layer of the unforgiving desert. Inside Sal's saloon, men paused mid-drink. Outside Miller's General Store, women clutched their packages and whispered behind gloved hands. Even the dogs seemed to sense something was wrong, slinking into whatever shade they could find and watching with wary eyes. The stagecoach door flew open with a violence that made the horses shy and stamp, and then she appeared. Or rather, she fell. Lydia Rowan hit the ground hard, her knees slamming into the dust, her hands barely catching her weight before her face followed. The white wedding dress she wore, or what remained of it, was torn at the shoulder, the fabric stained with dirt, sweat, and something darker that might have been blood. Her blonde hair, which should have been pinned up in careful curls for a bride, hung in matted tangles around a face that told a story no woman should have to live. The bruises were fresh. Purple and blue bloomed across her left cheek like some grotesque flower. Her lip was split, swollen on one side. When she tried to push herself up, her right wrist buckled, and she bit back a cry that came out as a whimper, the sound of someone who had learned that crying only made things worse. "Get out!" The voice from inside the stagecoach was slurred, thick with whiskey and rage. "Get the hell out, and don't you dare come crawling back, you worthless—" A bottle flew through the door, shattering against the side of the coach. Lydia flinched, curling into herself like she'd been struck again, her body remembering violence even when it didn't come. The man who emerged after her was everything a husband shouldn't be. Walter Crenshaw was 43, with the bloated face and unsteady gait of a man who loved his liquor more than anything else in this world. His vest was stained, his shirt half untucked, and when he pointed at Lydia with a thick, wavering finger, his eyes were bloodshot and mean. 3 days, he spat, his words carrying across the suddenly silent street. 3 goddamn days I gave you. 3 days to learn your place, to be a proper wife, to give me what I paid for. And what do? You cry. You fight. You make me look like a fool. He took a step toward her, and Lydia scrambled backward on her hands and knees, leaving smears of blood in the dust from where the rough ground had scraped her palms raw. "Please," she whispered, and her voice was hoarse, like she'd screamed herself raw. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone. You'll die out here," Walter said. And he laughed. A wet, ugly sound that made several people in the growing crowd look away in shame. "That's what you'll do. Die like the garbage you are. I paid good money for a bride, and what did I get? A broken, useless thing that can't even keep her mouth shut when a man needs—" "That's enough." The voice came from the edge of the crowd, quiet but carrying the kind of authority that didn't need volume. It cut through Walter's drunken tirade like a knife through butter, and the entire street seemed to hold its breath. The crowd parted, and a man stepped through. Elias Carter wasn't the biggest man in Copper Ridge, but he might have been the most formidable. At 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders built from years of ranch work, he moved with the careful economy of someone who had learned that every action should have purpose. His dark hair, shot through with gray at the temples despite being only 35, was pushed back under a worn hat. His face was weathered, lined at the eyes and mouth, in a way that suggested he'd spent more time squinting into the sun than smiling. But it was his eyes that people noticed, dark, almost black, and so direct in their gaze that most folks found themselves looking away first. He wore a simple work shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and canvas pants tucked into dusty boots. But at his hip, Riding easy in a worn leather holster was a Colt peacemaker that everyone in town knew he could draw faster than most men could think. Elias walked past Walter Crenshaw without even glancing at him, moving straight to where Lydia huddled in the dust. He stopped about 6 feet away, close enough to help, far enough not to frighten, and slowly, deliberately, he crouched down until his eyes were level with hers. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Can you stand?" Lydia stared at him, her blue eyes wide and glazed with shock. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked from Elias to Walter and back again, like she was trying to solve some impossible equation. "Now you wait just a damn minute," Walter blustered, finding his voice again. "That's my wife you're talking to. My property. You paid for a bride," Elias said, still not looking at Walter, his attention focused entirely on Lydia. "Not property, not livestock. A woman, a person, and from the look of things, you broke the contract first." He slowly extended his hand, palm up, giving Lydia the choice to take it or not. "Ma'am," he said again, "my name is Elias Carter. I have a ranch about 3 miles outside of town. Clean water, spare room, decent food, no questions asked, no debts owed. You can stay as long as you need to heal and figure out what you want to do next." He paused, and something that might have been the ghost of a smile touched his eyes. "Or you can walk away right now, and I'll respect that too. But either way, nobody's going to hurt you again, not while I'm standing here." The crowd had gone silent. Even Walter seemed struck temporarily speechless by the quiet certainty in Elias's words. Lydia looked at the offered hand. It was calloused, scarred across the knuckles, the hand of a working man. But there was no threat in it, no demand, just an offer, a choice. She hadn't been given a choice in so long. Her own hand trembled as she reached out. When her fingers touched his, Elias's grip was firm but gentle, and he helped her to her feet with the kind of care usually reserved for something precious and fragile. "Now you hold on." Walter started forward, but he didn't get far. Elias finally looked at him, and whatever Walter saw in those dark eyes made him stop cold. Elias's right hand hadn't moved from Lydia's, but his left had drifted to his hip, fingers brushing the grip of his Colt with the kind of casual intimacy that spoke of long familiarity. "You have 2 choices," Elias said, his voice still quiet but now carrying an edge sharp enough to cut bone. "Get back on that stagecoach and leave, or we can settle this another way. Your choice." Walter's face went purple, then white. His hand twitched toward his own belt, where a cheap pistol was tucked, but he was drunk and slow and everyone there knew it. Elias didn't even blink, just stood there with that same calm certainty, like he was discussing the weather instead of a man's life or death. "This ain't over," Walter finally spat, backing toward the stagecoach. "That's my wife. I paid good money." "Money doesn't buy people," Elias said. "Not anymore. Not ever again." Walter climbed back into the stagecoach, still muttering threats and curses, but there was no real force behind them now. The driver, who had watched the whole exchange with the weary expression of a man who'd seen too much and cared too little, just shook his head and snapped the reins. The coach lurched forward, wheels churning up more dust as it headed out of town, taking Walter Crenshaw and his rage with it. The crowd began to disperse, though the whispers would last for days. Elias ignored them all. He was still holding Lydia's hand, and he could feel how badly she was shaking. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. Lydia nodded, but when she took a step, her knees buckled. Elias caught her before she fell, his arm going around her waist, taking her weight easily. "It's all right," he murmured. "I've got you." "I can—" she started, her voice cracking. "I can walk. I don't need—" "I know," Elias said, "but you don't have to. Not right now." Something in those words, the permission to stop being strong, to stop fighting, just for a moment, broke whatever was left of Lydia's composure. She didn't cry, but her breathing went ragged and her body sagged against him like all her strings had been cut. Elias's wagon was hitched outside the general store. He helped Lydia into the back where he'd laid out clean blankets over the supply crates, giving her something soft to sit on. She curled into the corner, making herself as small as possible, her arms wrapped tight around her knees. "Mr. Carter," came a voice, and Elias turned to find Mrs. Henderson, the doctor's wife, hurrying over with a basket. "I've got some clean cloth, some salve, and a little laudanum if she needs it for the pain. Much obliged, ma'am, Elias said, taking the basket. Mrs. Henderson leaned closer, lowering her voice. That was a brave thing you did, Elias, but you know there'll be talk. There's always talk, Elias said simply. She can't stay out at your ranch alone with you. It isn't proper, Elias finished, and there was something almost bitter in the twist of his mouth. No, I suppose it isn't, but leaving her to die in the street isn't proper either, and I know which one I can live with. Mrs. Henderson opened her mouth, closed it, then nodded slowly. If anyone asks, I'll tell them she's recovering under medical supervision. That should quiet some of the gossips. Appreciate that. Elias climbed up onto the wagon seat and took the reins. As they rolled out of town, he could feel eyes watching from every window, could almost hear the whispers already starting. He didn't care. He'd stopped caring about what people thought a long time ago, when caring had cost him everything that mattered. The road to his ranch was rough, and he kept the horses at an easy pace to avoid jostling his passenger too much. Behind him, Lydia was silent, but he could hear her breathing, quick and shallow, the breathing of someone who was holding themselves together by sheer force of will. Ma'am, he said after a while, not turning around, there's water in the canteen under the seat if you're thirsty. Food too, though it's just some jerky and hardtack. Not much, but it's clean. No response. He hadn't really expected one. The ranch is about 30 minutes out, he continued, his voice low and steady. Small place. Just me and my foreman, Miguel, though he's getting up in years and mostly works the north pasture these days. Got a housekeeper, Rosa, who comes 3 times a week from town. Good woman. Keeps to herself, doesn't gossip. Still nothing, but he thought maybe Lydia's breathing had slowed a fraction. Got a spare room, Elias went on. Used to be. He stopped, swallowed. It's clean, private. Lock on the door if you want it. I can leave the key on your side so you're the only one who can get in. This time, he heard a small sound, almost like a sob that had been swallowed back down. You don't owe me anything, Elias said, and his voice was firm now, leaving no room for doubt. Not work, not money, not anything. You hear me? You don't owe anyone anything anymore. You're not property. You're not bought and paid for. You're a person, and you deserve to be treated like one. They rode in silence after that, the only sounds the creak of the wagon, the steady clop of hooves, and the whisper of wind through the scrub brush that dotted the landscape. The Carter Ranch appeared gradually, rising out of the desert like it had always been there and always would be. It wasn't much. A simple 2-story house with a wide porch, a barn that had seen better days, a handful of outbuildings, and a windmill that turned slowly in the breeze, pulling water up from some hidden depth below. Fences marked out pastures where a few dozen cattle grazed, and beyond that, the land stretched out red and empty all the way to the purple mountains that marked the horizon. But after the chaos of town, after the violence and the fear, the ranch felt like sanctuary, quiet, safe, still. Elias pulled the wagon up to the house and set the brake. He climbed down and moved to the back, offering his hand again. Let's get you inside, he said. This time, Lydia took his hand without hesitation. Her legs were steadier now, though she still moved like everything hurt. Elias kept his hand at her elbow, ready to catch her if she fell, as he guided her up the porch steps and through the front door. The inside of the house was simple but clean. Hardwood floors worn but well kept. Furniture that was functional rather than fancy. A sturdy table, a few chairs, a sofa that had seen better days but was still comfortable. The walls were bare except for a few simple shelves holding books and what looked like navigational equipment. No photographs, no paintings, nothing personal that might tell a story about who lived here. Kitchen's through there, Elias said, gesturing. Pump works, so there's always fresh water. Privy's out back, though I'm working on getting proper plumbing run in from the well. Bathroom's upstairs with a tub, but I'll need to haul water up if you want a hot bath. He led her to the stairs, taking them slowly, and opened a door at the end of the hall. The room was small but bright, with a window that looked out over the eastern pasture. There was a bed with a simple iron frame, made up with clean white sheets and a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, a wardrobe, a chair by the window. And on the door, true to his word, was a sturdy lock with a key sitting on the inside frame. I'll bring up some water so you can wash, Elias said, and I'll see if I can find you something to wear. Won't fit perfect, but it'll be better than. He gestured vaguely at her ruined dress. Lydia stepped into the room like she was entering a church, her eyes wide, taking in everything. When she turned back to Elias, there were tears on her face, though her expression was still shell-shocked and distant. "Why?" she whispered. It was the first word she'd spoken since the street, and her voice was raw. "Why are you helping me?" Elias was quiet for a long moment. When he answered, his voice was soft, almost sad. "Because someone should have helped her," he said, "and nobody did." Before Lydia could ask what he meant, he stepped back into the hall. "I'll give you some privacy. Water will be outside the door in a few minutes. If you need anything at all, just knock on any door. I'll hear you." He pulled the door closed, and Lydia heard his footsteps retreat down the stairs. She stood there, swaying slightly, looking around the room that was suddenly hers. The bed, the window, the lock. Her hand trembled as she reached for the key, picked it up, fitted it into the lock. The mechanism turned with a solid click, and for the first time in 3 days, maybe for the first time in her whole life, Lydia was in a space where no one could get to her unless she chose to let them in. The sob that broke from her chest was wrenching, tearing its way up from some deep, dark place where she'd been storing all her pain, all her fear, all her rage. She pressed her fist against her mouth, trying to muffle the sound, but it was too big, too powerful. She sank to the floor, her back against the door, and cried like the world was ending. Downstairs, Elias heard. He stood at the base of the stairs, one hand gripping the banister so hard his knuckles went white, listening to the muffled sounds of a woman's breakdown and doing absolutely nothing. Because sometimes, the kindest thing you could do was let someone fall apart in private. He went to the kitchen, filled a large basin with water from the pump, and carried it upstairs. He set it gently outside her door, knocked once, and retreated before she could feel obligated to respond. Then he went to his own room, the master bedroom that had been his and Evelyn's, though he rarely slept there anymore, preferring the couch or sometimes the barn, and opened the wardrobe that still held her clothes. His hand hovered over a simple calico dress, blue with small white flowers. Evelyn had liked this one, had worn it when they'd driven into town for supplies, when they'd sat on the porch in the evenings, when they danced in the kitchen on her birthday. His jaw clenched, but he took the dress out anyway, along with some undergarments that he tried very hard not to look at too closely. He found a pair of soft shoes that might fit, folded everything carefully, carried the bundle to Lydia's door, and left it beside the water. By the time he made it back downstairs, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Elias stood on the porch, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease, and watched the colors fade. Behind him, the house was quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood settling. Upstairs, Lydia had finally stopped crying. He wondered if she was washing or sleeping or just sitting in that locked room feeling safe for the first time in God knew how long. He wondered if she'd stay, if she'd run, if she'd wake up tomorrow and decide that a silent rancher with a dead wife and a reputation for violence wasn't any better than the drunk who'd beaten her. He wouldn't blame her if she did, but something in him, some small, stubborn part that he thought had died with Evelyn, hoped she wouldn't. The sun sank below the horizon, and the desert cooled rapidly, the way it always did. Elias finished his cigarette, ground it out carefully against the porch rail, and went inside to make dinner. He kept it simple: beans, bacon, fresh bread he'd bought in town that morning. He set 2 places at the table, then thought better of it and put one of the plates on a tray, along with a glass of milk, some of the salve Mrs. Henderson had provided, and clean bandages. He carried the tray upstairs and set it outside Lydia's door. Knocked once. "Food's outside," he called through the door. "And medicine for those bruises. Take your time. No rush." He went back downstairs and ate alone at the table, the way he'd been eating for 3 years now, the way he'd expected to eat for the rest of his life. The food tasted like ash, but that was nothing new. He was washing his plate when he heard the soft creak of her door opening. Footsteps across the floor, light and hesitant, the gentle scrape of the tray being picked up, the door closing again, the lock clicking home. Elias closed his eyes and let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. She'd stayed, at least for tonight. It was a start. He finished cleaning up, checked that the doors were locked and the windows secure, then settled onto the couch with an old book he'd read a dozen times before. He didn't expect to sleep much. He rarely did these days, but at least he could rest, could let his guard down a fraction, could... A scream shattered the silence. Elias was on his feet and up the stairs before the sound even registered consciously, the book tumbling to the floor. His gun was in his hand, though he didn't remember drawing it, and every instinct screamed danger, threat, attack. Lydia! He reached her door, tried the handle, locked. Lydia, open the door. No! Her voice was raw, terrified. No, please, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Please don't. She wasn't talking to him. She was still trapped in whatever nightmare had grabbed her. Lydia, listen to me, Elias said, forcing his voice to stay calm, steady. You're safe. You're at my ranch. Nobody's going to hurt you. It was just a dream. Just a bad dream. Please, she sobbed. Please, I'll be good. I promise I'll be good. Just don't. You don't have to be anything, Elias said, and he slowly holstered his gun, pressing his palm flat against the door like he could somehow transfer calm through the wood. You don't have to be good or bad or anything. You just have to breathe. Can you do that for me? Just breathe. The sobbing on the other side of the door was gradually slowing, becoming less frantic. That's it, Elias murmured. In and out, nice and slow. You're safe. I promise you're safe. Elias? Her voice was small, uncertain, like a child's. I'm here. Will you? Will? She paused, and he heard her take a shuddering breath. Will you stay? Just until I fall asleep? I can't. I'll stay, he said immediately. As long as you need. He settled onto the floor in the hallway, his back against the wall beside her door. Inside, he heard the creak of the bed as she lay back down. Are you still there? She asked after a moment. Still here. Thank you. No need for thanks. They sat in silence for a while, separated by a wooden door but somehow together in the dark. Elias? Lydia's voice was drowsy now, exhaustion pulling her back towards sleep. Who was she? The woman you couldn't help? Elias's throat tightened. He'd been asked that question before in different ways, by different people. He'd never answered it, but something about sitting in the dark, talking to a woman he couldn't see, made the truth easier. My wife, he said quietly. Her name was Evelyn. What happened to her? He was quiet for so long that he thought maybe Lydia had fallen asleep, but then he heard her breathe, waiting, and the words came tumbling out before he could stop them. She killed herself 3 years ago, hung herself from a beam in the barn. His voice was flat, emotionless, reciting facts. They said it was because of me, because I was cold, distant, cruel, because I drove her to it. Did you? Lydia asked, and there was no judgment in her voice, just genuine curiosity. No, Elias said, but I couldn't prove it, and in this country a man's word means more than a dead woman's truth. I'm sorry. So am I. More silence. Then, so soft he almost missed it. I believe you. Elias closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 years he felt something in his chest that might have been relief. Sleep, he said. I'll be here when you wake up. And he was. When the sun rose the next morning, painting the hallway in shades of gold, Elias was still there, his back against the wall, his legs stretched out in front of him. He hadn't slept, but that was fine. He hadn't expected to. Inside the room, Lydia had finally found peace enough to rest, her breathing deep and even. And for the first time in a very long time, the Carter Ranch held 2 broken people instead of just 1. It wasn't healing, not yet, but it was the first step, and sometimes that's all you can ask for. The first week passed like a fever dream, measured not in days but in small mercies and careful distances. Lydia slept mostly, her body demanding payment for 3 days of terror and a lifetime of just barely surviving. She would wake in the afternoon to find food outside her door, simple things, nothing that required her to face anyone. Biscuits with honey, cold chicken, fresh milk in a blue ceramic pitcher. Once, a bowl of stew that was still warm, steam rising into the hallway like a gentle ghost. She ate alone in her room with the door locked, and Elias never asked her to do otherwise. On the third day, she found a dress laid out on the chair by her window. Not the calico one from that first night. She'd folded that carefully and left it outside her door like returning something borrowed, but another one, this time a practical gray cotton with small pearl buttons. Next to it, a note in careful handwriting, "No rush, whenever you're ready." She wasn't ready, but she put the dress on anyway because her ruined wedding gown had finally become unbearable to look at, a ghost she needed to bury. On the fifth day, she unlocked her door and left it open. It was a small thing, barely worth noticing, but when Elias came upstairs that evening with her dinner, he paused in the hallway and looked at that open door for a long moment before setting the tray down and walking away without a word. On the seventh day, Lydia came downstairs. It was early morning, the house still cool and dim, and she moved like a shadow, barely breathing, ready to flee at the slightest sound. But the house was quiet. Through the kitchen window, she could see Elias outside, working with a horse in the small corral beside the barn. He was speaking to the animal in low, patient tones, and even from this distance, she could see how the horse, a young chestnut mare with a white blaze, leaned into his touch, trusting him completely. She watched for a while, then made herself coffee with hands that only shook a little. The normalcy of it, the ritual of grinding beans, boiling water, the bitter smell that filled the kitchen, was almost enough to make her cry again. "Morning." Lydia spun around so fast she nearly dropped the cup. Elias stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, his expression carefully neutral. "Sorry," he said immediately. "Didn't mean to startle you. I came in the back door." It's fine," Lydia managed, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "I was just making coffee," Elias finished. "That's good. Real good. I usually just boil yesterday's grounds again, so whatever you made is bound to be better than what I'm used to." He moved to the counter, giving her a wide berth, and poured himself a cup from the pot she'd made. He took a sip, and something that might have been surprise crossed his face. "That's actually really good," he said. "Where'd you learn to make coffee like this?" "My mother," Lydia said quietly. "She worked in a hotel kitchen in Philadelphia. Said the secret was a pinch of salt to cut the bitterness." "Smart woman." They stood in silence for a moment, drinking their coffee. The kitchen filled with pale morning light, and somewhere outside a rooster crowed, announcing the day whether anyone wanted it or not. "I should get back to work," Elias said finally, "but if you're up for it, there's eggs in the basket by the stove, fresh this morning. Help yourself to whatever you want." "Mr. Carter," Lydia said, and he paused. "Why haven't you asked me any questions?" Elias turned to look at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Because you'll tell me what you want me to know when you're ready to tell it," he said. "And anything you don't want me to know isn't any of my business." "Most people wouldn't see it that way." "I'm not most people." He settled his hat back on his head and moved toward the door, but Lydia's voice stopped him again. "I was a seamstress," she said, the words coming out in a rush like she needed to say them before she lost her nerve. "In Philadelphia. I lived with my aunt after my parents died. Yellow fever. I was 16. My aunt, she wasn't cruel exactly, but she made it clear I was a burden. When I turned 23, she said it was time I found a husband or found somewhere else to live." Elias didn't turn around, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he was listening with his whole body. "I didn't have any prospects," Lydia continued. "No dowry, no connections, no beauty to speak of. So I answered an advertisement in the paper. A rancher in Arizona, looking for a wife. The letter he sent was kind, gentle. He talked about building a life together, about partnership and respect. He seemed like a good man." "Walter Crenshaw," Elias said, and his voice had gone flat and hard. "Yes, but the man who wrote those letters wasn't the man who met me at the station in Tucson. That man was already drunk. That man looked at me like I was a piece of property he'd ordered from a catalog and was disappointed with the quality of." She set her coffee cup down because her hands were shaking too badly to hold it anymore. "The first night, Her voice broke, and she had to stop, had to breathe, had to force the words out past the tightness in her throat. "He tried to force himself on me. I fought him, scratched his face, screamed, locked myself in the room he'd given me. And for 3 days, every time he got drunk enough, he'd come back. He'd beat on the door, threaten me, tell me all the things he was going to do to me for being an ungrateful, cock-teasing little— "You don't have to say it," Elias interrupted. And when he finally turned to face her, there was something terrible in his eyes. Not directed at her, never at her, but burning there nonetheless. "You don't have to tell me what he said." "On the third day, the door broke," Lydia whispered. "He came in, and he was so angry, and he—" She touched her face, tracing the fading bruises. "When he was done, he threw me in the stagecoach like garbage, told the driver to dump me in Copper Ridge because he was done with me. Said I could rot in the desert for all he cared." The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stone. "I'm going to kill him," Elias said finally, and he said it the way other men might say, "I'm going to town," or "I'm going to check the fences," like it was a simple statement of fact, not a promise of violence. "No," Lydia said, and her voice was stronger now, harder. "You're not, because that's what he wants. He wants to matter. He wants to be important enough that someone would risk their life over him. And he's not. He's nothing. Just another drunk small man who has to hurt women to feel powerful." Elias studied her for a long moment, and something that might have been respect flickered in his expression. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "I don't feel strong. The strong ones never do." He picked up his own coffee cup, drained it, and set it in the sink. "I've got work to do. But Lydia, you're safe here, for as long as you want to stay. And if Walter Crenshaw or anyone else comes looking for you, they'll have to go through me first." He left before she could respond, the screen door banging shut behind him, and Lydia stood alone in the kitchen with tears streaming down her face and something that felt almost like hope flickering in her chest. The days developed a rhythm after that. Lydia would wake early and make coffee, real coffee, the kind that didn't taste like boiled dirt, and Elias would appear from whatever corner of the ranch he'd been working and drink it like it was a gift from God. They didn't talk much during these morning meetings, just shared the quiet companionship of two people who had learned that silence could be kinder than words. Then Elias would disappear to work the ranch, and Lydia would exist. She would sit on the porch and watch the desert, or wander through the house, or sometimes just stand at her window and stare at nothing, trying to remember who she'd been before Walter Crenshaw had broken her. But slowly, incrementally, she started to reclaim herself. She found Elias's pathetic excuse for a garden, a few struggling tomato plants and some herbs that were more dead than alive, and brought it back to life with patient watering and careful weeding. She cleaned the house, not because she felt obligated, but because she needed something to do with her hands, needed to feel useful, needed to prove to herself that she could still create order from chaos. And she cooked. God, she cooked. Meals that weren't just fuel, but actual food. Bread that was fluffy and golden instead of hard as stone. Stews that didn't taste like leather. Roasted vegetables that made the whole house smell like comfort and home. She used the chicken's eggs to make custards and cakes. She found wild berries growing near the creek and turned them into preserves. Elias never asked her to do any of it, but the first time he came in from a long day of mending fence to find a real dinner waiting, pot roast with vegetables, fresh bread, and an apple pie that was still warm from the oven, he stopped dead in the doorway and just stared. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "I know," Lydia replied, "but I wanted to. Is that all right?" "It's more than all right." They ate together that night, sitting at opposite ends of the table with 3 feet of empty space between them, but it was the first meal Lydia had shared with another person since Philadelphia, and it felt like something significant had shifted. "This is the best thing I've eaten in 3 years, Elias said, after his third helping of pie. "Your standards must be very low." "They're not. You're just that good." He paused, then added carefully, "If you wanted to keep cooking, I could give you money for supplies. Make a weekly run into town for whatever you need." "I don't want your money." "Then call it a trade. You cook, I'll buy the supplies. Fair exchange." Lydia considered this. "Fair exchange," she agreed. It was the first contract she'd entered into willingly in longer than she could remember, and somehow that made all the difference. 2 weeks became 3, and 3 became 4. And somewhere in that time, Lydia stopped thinking of the ranch as a temporary shelter and started thinking of it as something that might, maybe, possibly become home. She learned the rhythms of the place, how Elias would ride out at dawn to check the cattle and wouldn't return until late morning, dusty and tired, but satisfied. How Miguel, the aging foreman, would stop by twice a week to discuss ranch business and would always tip his hat to her with a quiet señora that made her feel respected instead of owned. How Rosa, the housekeeper, would arrive on Wednesdays and Saturdays, a small, fierce woman in her 60s who had looked at Lydia's fading bruises that first day and said simply, "I'm glad you're here, mija. This house has been sad too long." She learned which floorboards creaked, which windows stuck, where the light fell best for reading in the afternoons. She learned that Elias kept a vegetable garden that he was terrible at maintaining, a small library full of books about astronomy and navigation, and a workshop in the barn where he built things with his hands when he needed to think. And slowly, carefully, she learned about Evelyn. Not from Elias, who rarely spoke about his dead wife except in brief, guarded moments, but from the house itself, from the dresses still hanging in the master bedroom wardrobe, from the pressed flowers marking pages in books, from the journal she found hidden in the back of a kitchen drawer, its leather cover worn soft with handling. She shouldn't have read it. She knew that. It was private, intimate, someone else's pain turned into words. But she couldn't help herself. The early entries were happy. Evelyn Carter had been young when she married Elias, barely 20 to his 28, and deeply in love. Her handwriting was looping and enthusiastic, decorated with little drawings of flowers and horses and the ranch she was so excited to make into a home. "Elias brought me wildflowers today," one entry read. "He's not a man of many words, but he speaks through gestures, through touches, through the way he looks at me when he thinks I'm not watching. I am so lucky to have found him." But as the months progressed, the entries changed. The drawings disappeared first. Then the enthusiasm dimmed, replaced by something more anxious, more fearful. "There was an incident in town today," one entry began, and Lydia felt her chest tighten. "A man, Mr. Hughes, one of the wealthier ranchers, stopped me outside the general store. He was too close, his breath smelled of whiskey, and he said things that made my skin crawl. Elias wasn't with me. I wish he had been. I wish I'd had the courage to tell Mr. Hughes to step away, but I was raised to be polite, to not make scenes. I just hurried home and tried to forget." But Evelyn couldn't forget. The entries that followed detailed a growing nightmare. Hughes appearing at the ranch when Elias was away, Hughes following her in town. Hughes making comments that started as compliments and grew increasingly crude, increasingly possessive. "He cornered me today," one entry read, the handwriting shakier now, less controlled, "in the alley behind the church. Put his hand on my waist and told me I was wasting myself on a cold, broken man like Elias. Said he could show me what a real man could do. I pushed him away and ran, but I can't stop shaking. I can't stop feeling his hands on me. I want to tell Elias, but what can he do? Hughes is powerful, respected. No one would believe me. And if Elias confronted him, if there was violence, Elias would be the one blamed. I won't risk that. I won't risk losing him." Lydia's hands trembled as she turned the pages, reading through Evelyn's descent into despair. The final entries were brief, disjointed, the writing of someone who had given up hope. "I can't bear it anymore. The way Hughes looks at me, the things he says, the knowledge that no one will help me, that no one will believe me, that I am utterly alone in this. I've thought about leaving, but where would I go? I have no family, no money, no skills that would allow me to survive on my own. I am trapped, and I am so tired." The last entry was dated 3 years ago, just 2 days before Evelyn's death. "I love Elias. I need him to know that. Whatever happens, whatever people say, I love him. He deserves better than this, better than me. I'm sorry." Lydia closed the journal carefully, her vision blurred with tears. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time, just holding the worn leather, feeling the weight of another woman's suffering. She understood now. Understood why Elias had stepped forward in the street that day, why he'd brought her here, why he'd given her safety and space and respect without asking for anything in return. He was trying to save her the way he hadn't been able to save Evelyn. That evening, when Elias came in from working with the horses, Lydia had dinner ready, chicken and dumplings, one of his favorites, but she also had something else prepared. I found Evelyn's journal, she said before she could lose her nerve. Elias went very still. Where? Kitchen drawer. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have read it, but it's all right, he said quietly. I should have thrown it away, or burned it, or something. Why didn't you? He was silent for a long time, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands, looking at nothing in particular. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. Because it was proof, he said. Proof that she didn't kill herself because of me. Proof that Nathaniel Hughes destroyed her, but proving it and being believed are two different things. People think you drove her to suicide. Most of them, yeah. Hughes made sure of that. He was at her funeral, crying like he'd lost his own wife, telling anyone who'd listen how I was cold and cruel, how I didn't appreciate what I had, how poor Evelyn must have been so lonely, so desperate. His hands clenched around the brim of his hat. And I couldn't say a goddamn thing, because if I accused Hughes of assaulting her, of harassing her, people would say I was just trying to deflect blame. A man like him, wealthy, respected, pillar of the community, versus a man like me? Who do you think they'd believe? So you just let them think the worst of you? What choice did I have? He finally looked at her and his eyes were full of old pain. I tried to tell the truth, went to the sheriff, showed him the journal, explained what Evelyn had been going through. You know what he said? He said troubled women often make up stories, that Evelyn was clearly unbalanced, and that I should be grateful he wasn't charging me with anything. Lydia felt sick. And Hughes? Still runs his ranch, still comes to town every Saturday and tips his hat to the ladies and buys rounds at the saloon. Still walks around like he's done nothing wrong, because to everyone else, he hasn't. Elias's voice had gone flat, emotionless. He killed my wife as sure as if he'd pulled the trigger himself, and he got away with it. I'm sorry, Lydia whispered. Don't be. It's not your fault. He set his hat on the hook by the door and moved to wash his hands at the pump. But now you know why I brought you here. Why I couldn't just walk away. Because you see Evelyn when you look at me. No, Elias said, and his voice was firm. I see someone who deserves better. Same as Evelyn deserved better. Same as every woman who's ever been hurt by a man who thought he had the right to hurt her. He dried his hands and turned to face her fully. You're not Evelyn, Lydia. You're you. And you deserve to be safe and respected and given the chance to heal. That's all I'm trying to do here. They ate dinner in comfortable silence after that, the weight of shared understanding settling between them like a bridge finally built. It was Rosa who brought the news from town. She arrived on a Wednesday afternoon with her usual basket of cleaning supplies and a face tight with worry. Lydia was hanging laundry on the line when Rosa hurried over, her voice low and urgent. There is talk, she said without preamble. Bad talk. About you and Elias. Lydia felt her stomach drop. What kind of talk? That you are living here unmarried. That it is improper. That Elias is taking advantage of you. Rosa's mouth pressed into a thin line. Clint Marlowe, the saloon owner, he is the worst. He says things, ugly things, about what you must be doing to earn your keep. Heat flooded Lydia's cheeks. I know, Rosa said gently. Anyone with eyes can see that Elias treats you with nothing but respect. But people like Marlowe, they do not care about truth. They care about gossip, about feeling superior to others. What should I do? Nothing. You do nothing. You hold your head high and you live your life. Rosa squeezed her arm. But you should know that some people, they are pushing for the sheriff to investigate. They say that Elias has a history, that maybe you are in danger, that maybe he would never hurt me, Lydia said fiercely. I know that too. But they do not. Rosa glanced toward the house, where Elias was inside working on accounts. Just be careful, both of you. There are those in Copper Ridge who would like nothing more than to see Elias fail, and they will use you to do it if they can. That night, Lydia couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house settle around her. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hall. Elias, restless as always, probably heading downstairs to read until dawn. She should stay in her room, should mind her own business, should She was out of bed and in the hallway before she could talk herself out of it. Elias was sitting on the couch, a book open in his lap, but his eyes staring at nothing. He looked up when she appeared, surprise flickering across his face. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Rosa told me about the gossip, about what people are saying." Elias closed his book. "I figured someone would eventually. This is a small town. People have nothing better to do than speculate about their neighbors." "Aren't you worried?" "About what people think of me?" "No. I stopped caring about that a long time ago. But they're talking about investigating you, about whether I'm safe here." "Are you?" Elias asked, and his eyes were direct, unflinching. "Safe here, I mean, because if you're not, if there's anything I've done that's made you uncomfortable or afraid, I need to know." "You've been nothing but kind to me," Lydia said. "You've given me everything and asked for nothing. You've treated me with more respect than anyone in my entire life. So yes, I feel safe here, safer than I've ever been." Something in Elias's expression softened. "Good, then the rest of it doesn't matter. But if the sheriff comes, then we'll deal with it, together." He paused, then added, "Unless you want to leave. I would understand if you did. If staying here is causing you more trouble than it's worth—" "It's worth it," Lydia interrupted. "This place, this peace, it's worth whatever gossip people want to spread." They looked at each other across the dimly lit room, and something unspoken passed between them. Not love, not yet, but understanding, trust, the fragile beginnings of something that might, given time, become unbreakable. "You should get some sleep," Elias said finally. "So should you." "I will. Eventually." Lydia started back toward the stairs, then stopped. "Elias? Thank you for everything, for seeing me as a person instead of just a problem to solve." "You were never a problem," he said quietly. "You were just someone who needed help, and I'm glad I could give it." She went back to bed, and this time she slept. But the peace wouldn't last, because 3 days later, Sheriff Tom Briggs rode up to the ranch with 2 deputies, and the careful life Lydia and Elias had been building started to crack. The sheriff was a large man gone soft around the middle, with a face like worn leather and eyes that had seen too much and cared too little. He dismounted slowly, his hand resting on his gun belt in a gesture that might have been habit or might have been threat. "Elias," he said by way of greeting. "Sheriff." Elias had come out onto the porch, and Lydia stood behind him in the doorway, her heart hammering. "What can I do for you?" "Got some complaints from town. People worried about this young lady here." He nodded toward Lydia, worried she might not be staying here of her own free will. "She is," Elias said flatly. "That true, miss?" The sheriff addressed Lydia directly. "You staying here because you want to, or because you're scared of what might happen if you leave?" Lydia stepped forward, forcing her voice to stay steady. "I'm staying because Mr. Carter offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to go. He's been nothing but respectful and kind. Whatever people are saying, it's not true." "You married to him?" "No." "Living as man and wife?" "No," Lydia said, heat flooding her cheeks. "I have my own room, my own space. Mr. Carter has we've never—" "That's enough," Elias interrupted, his voice dangerous. "She's answered your question. Now, unless you have actual evidence of wrongdoing, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave my property." The sheriff studied them both for a long moment. "Look, Elias, I'm not trying to cause trouble, but you've got to see how this looks. You, with your history—" "My history," Elias said slowly, "is of being a man who lost his wife to suicide after she was harassed by someone who was supposed to be a pillar of this community. My history is of trying to do the right thing and being punished for it. And now my history is of helping a woman who was beaten and abandoned, and somehow that's being twisted into something ugly." "Is that what happened?" The sheriff looked at Lydia. "You were beaten?" "Yes," she whispered, and despite her best efforts, her voice shook. "By my husband, Walter Crenshaw. He married me by proxy, and when I arrived, he—" She stopped, swallowed, forced herself to continue. "He hurt me. For 3 days. Then he threw me out of a stagecoach and left me to die. Mr. Carter was the only person who helped me." The sheriff's expression shifted, something that might have been shame flickering in his eyes. I see. And this Crenshaw, where is he now? Gone. Left town the same day. And good riddance. Well, the sheriff shifted his weight, suddenly uncomfortable. I suppose that changes things a bit, does it? Elias's voice was cold. Or are you still going to investigate me because Clint Marlowe and his drinking buddies decided I must be doing something wrong? Now, Elias, get off my property, Tom. Unless you're charging me with something, we're done here. The sheriff opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded slowly. All right. But the talk isn't going to stop just because I'm satisfied. You might want to think about how this looks, for both your sakes. He and his deputies mounted up and rode away, leaving Lydia and Elias standing on the porch in heavy silence. I'm sorry, Lydia said finally. I'm bringing trouble to your door. You're not bringing anything, Elias said. The trouble was already here. It's been here since Evelyn died, since this town decided I was guilty without evidence. You're just giving them a new excuse to whisper and judge. Maybe I should leave, go somewhere else. Somewhere where people don't know. No. Elias turned to face her fully, and his eyes were fierce. Don't let them win, Lydia. Don't let them chase you away from the first safe place you've found. Stay. Fight. Show them that you won't be broken by gossip or judgment or their small, cruel minds. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that. You are, he said with absolute certainty. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You survived Walter Crenshaw. You can survive this. She wanted to believe him, wanted to have that kind of courage, that kind of strength, but standing there on the porch, watching the dust settle where the sheriff had ridden away, all she felt was small and scared and so very tired of fighting. Come on, Elias said gently. Let's go inside. I'll make us some coffee, though it'll taste terrible compared to yours, and we'll figure out what to do next. They went inside together, and as the door closed behind them, Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something worse than gossip, something that would test them both in ways they couldn't yet imagine. She just didn't know how right she was. The storm broke 2 weeks later, not with rain but with federal badges and accusations that cut deeper than any knife. Lydia was in the garden, her hands deep in the soil, coaxing life from the stubborn Arizona earth. She'd discovered she had a gift for growing things, for taking what seemed dead and making it bloom again. Maybe because she understood what it felt like to be broken and still have to find a way to survive. She heard the horses first, too many of them, moving too fast. By the time she stood and wiped the dirt from her hands, 3 riders had already crested the rise, their horses kicking up dust devils that twisted in the morning heat. 2 wore the silver stars of federal marshals. The third was Sheriff Briggs, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Elias emerged from the barn, and Lydia saw his body go rigid, saw his hand drift toward his hip before he forced it still. Whatever these men wanted, it wasn't going to be good. Elias Carter? The lead marshal was a thin man with cold eyes and a mouth like a knife wound. He dismounted with the precise movements of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. That's me. I'm Marshal Webb. This is Marshal Harrison. We need to ask you some questions about events that took place approximately 3 years ago. Lydia's blood went cold. She started moving toward the house, but Elias caught her eye and gave a small shake of his head. Stay back. Stay safe. What events? Elias asked, his voice carefully neutral. The death of Nathaniel Hughes. The name fell like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shock through the morning air. Lydia felt her knees go weak. Hughes. The man who'd tormented Evelyn, the man whose assault had driven her to suicide. He was dead? Hughes died 4 days ago, Webb continued, watching Elias's face like a hawk watches a rabbit. Shot twice in his study. His widow, Margaret Hughes, was killed the same night, also shot. Someone wrote a message on the mirror in her blood. For Evelyn. You want to tell me about that? Elias's face had gone pale, but his voice stayed steady. I don't know anything about it. No? Because we have a witness who says otherwise. Says you hired him 6 months ago to kill Hughes, paid him $500 up front, promised another $500 when the job was done. That's a lie. Is it? Because this witness, Marcus Reed, does that name mean anything to you? He's got a lot of details. Says you met him in a saloon in Tucson. Says you told him exactly how Hughes destroyed your wife. Says you wanted him to make Hughes suffer before he died. I've never been to Tucson, never heard of Marcus Reed, and I sure as hell never hired anyone to kill Nathaniel Hughes. Elias's hands had curled into fists at his sides. Though I can't say I'm sorry he's dead. That man was a monster who destroyed my wife and got away with it. That sounds like motive to me, Marshal Harrison said. He was bigger than Webb, with the build of a man who enjoyed violence. You just admitted you hated him. Half the territory hated him. Hughes was a rich bastard who thought his money put him above the law. I wasn't the only person who wanted him dead. But you're the only person whose wife's name was written in blood at the crime scene. Webb pulled out a pair of iron shackles. Elias Carter, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. You'll be transported to Tucson to stand trial. On what evidence? Elias demanded. The word of some man I've never met? That's not enough. It's enough to hold you while we investigate. And if you're innocent like you claim, the trial will prove it. Webb moved forward with the shackles. Now we can do this easy or hard. Your choice. Lydia couldn't stay silent anymore. She ran forward, putting herself between Elias and the marshals. Wait! You can't just arrest him based on some stranger's word. What proof do you have? What evidence? Ma'am, you need to step aside, Webb said, his voice cold. No, I won't let you. Lydia. Elias's voice was quiet but firm. It's all right. Let them do their job. It's not all right. They're accusing you of murder. And fighting them won't change that. He looked at her, and his eyes were steady despite the fear she could see lurking in their depths. Go into town, find Rosa, tell her what happened. She'll know what to do. Elias, trust me. Please. The marshals moved forward, and Elias held out his wrists without resistance. The shackles closed around them with a sound like bones breaking, and Lydia felt something inside her crack too. Where are you taking him? She demanded, turning on Webb. Tucson. He'll be held there until trial. Webb mounted his horse, and Harrison hauled Elias up onto a third mount, binding his hands to the saddle horn. If you're smart, ma'am, you'll forget about Elias Carter. Man's got nothing but trouble following him, and you don't want to be caught in that storm. They rode away, Elias sitting straight-backed and silent between the two marshals, and Sheriff Briggs lingered just long enough to say, I'm sorry, Miss Rowan. I tried to tell them this was wrong, but federal law trumps local jurisdiction. There's nothing I can do. Then he was gone too, and Lydia stood alone in the dust, watching the man who'd saved her life being taken away in chains. She didn't cry. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Instead, she ran. The 3 miles into Copper Ridge had never seemed longer. Her lungs burned, her legs ached, but she didn't stop, didn't slow. She had to reach Rosa, had to figure out what to do, had to find some way to save Elias the way he'd saved her. She found Rosa at the church, cleaning as she always did on Thursday mornings. The older woman took one look at Lydia's face and set down her broom. Tell me, she said simply. Lydia told her everything, the words tumbling out in a breathless rush. Rosa's face grew darker with each sentence, her mouth pressing into a thin, hard line. Marcus Reed, she muttered when Lydia finished. I know this name. He is a drunk, a liar. He would say anything for money. Then how do we prove it? How do we show the marshals they've arrested the wrong man? We find the truth. Rosa straightened, and despite her small stature and advanced age, there was something fierce about her, something that reminded Lydia of a mother bear protecting her cubs. Come. We go to the sheriff. We make him help us. But Sheriff Briggs was less than helpful. He listened to their pleas with the expression of a man watching a train wreck he was powerless to stop. Look, I believe Elias is innocent, he said, spreading his hands helplessly, but believing isn't enough. The federal marshals have jurisdiction here, and unless we can prove Reed is lying, there's nothing I can do. Then help us prove it, Lydia said desperately. Where's Reed now? Can we talk to him? He's in Tucson being held as a material witness. You'd never get access to him. What about the crime scene? Can we? It's been cleaned. Margaret Hughes' family claimed the body and the property. There's nothing left to investigate. Lydia wanted to scream, to rage, to break something. Instead, she forced herself to think. There has to be something, some way to prove Elias is innocent. If there is, I don't know what it would be. Briggs leaned back in his chair, looking older and more tired than Lydia had ever seen him. I'm sorry, I truly am, but sometimes the system fails good people, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. Rosa and Lydia left the sheriff's office in heavy silence. Outside, the sun was merciless, beating down on the dusty street like judgment itself. We don't give up, Rosa said firmly. There is always a way. We just need to find it. They spent the next 2 days searching. Rosa talked to everyone she knew, collecting gossip and rumors and fragments of truth. Lydia went through Evelyn's journal again, looking for anything that might help Elias's case, any detail that might prove his innocence. But every lead went nowhere. Every hope turned to ash. On the third day, a stranger rode into town. Lydia was at the general store, buying supplies for the ranch that now sat empty without Elias there to work it, when she heard the commotion outside. She emerged to find a young man dismounting from an exhausted horse, his face drawn with fatigue and worry. He was perhaps 25, with sandy brown hair and eyes the same shade of blue as her own. When he turned and saw her, he stopped dead. Lydia? His voice cracked on her name. She stared at him, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Thomas? Her brother, her baby brother, who she hadn't seen in 7 years, who she'd thought had forgotten she existed, crossed the dusty street in 3 strides and pulled her into a crushing hug. Thank God, he breathed into her hair. Thank God I found you. What are you doing here? How did you... I've been looking for you for months. He pulled back, keeping his hands on her shoulders like he was afraid she might disappear. When Aunt Margaret said you'd gone to Arizona to marry some rancher, I tried to find out where. But the agency that arranged the marriage, they wouldn't give me any information, said it was confidential. So I came out here myself and started checking every town, every ranch, asking about mail-order brides. Lydia felt tears burning her eyes. Thomas, I know, he said gently. I know what happened with Crenshaw. I went to Tucson first, tracked him down. He told me his version, but I didn't believe him. I knew there had to be more to the story. How did you find me here? Asked around in Tucson about abandoned brides. A stagecoach driver remembered a woman in a torn wedding dress. Told me he'd dropped her in Copper Ridge. So I came here, and everyone's talking about you and some rancher named Carter, and... He stopped, studying her face. Are you all right? Did he hurt you? No, Lydia said quickly. No, Elias saved me. He's a good man, Thomas, the best man I've ever known. But he's in terrible trouble, and I don't know how to help him. She told him everything as they walked back to the ranch together, about Evelyn, about Hughes, about the accusations and the arrest. Thomas listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each revelation. This Marcus Reed, he said when she finished. The man who claims Elias hired him. I know that name. Lydia's heart jumped. You do? Yeah. He was in Tucson when I was there, bragging in a saloon about how he'd made easy money giving false testimony to some federal marshals. Said he'd memorized a script they'd written for him, played his part perfectly, and walked away $500 richer. That's proof. Lydia grabbed his arm. Thomas, that's proof Elias is innocent. It's hearsay. My word against Reed's, but... He paused, thinking hard. But I wasn't the only person in that saloon. There were others who heard him. If we could get them to testify... Would they? Would they go against federal marshals? Some might, if we can convince them it's the right thing to do. Thomas's jaw set with determination. We need to go to Tucson. Now. Before the trial starts. I can't leave the ranch. Someone needs to... I'll stay, Rosa said. She'd followed them from town and had been listening quietly. I'll take care of the animals, the house. You go. Save Elias. Rosa, I can't ask you to... You're not asking. I'm telling. Rosa squeezed Lydia's hand. Elias is a good man who has suffered enough. And you love him, even if you haven't said the words yet. Go. Fight for him the way he fought for you. Lydia felt heat flood her cheeks, but she didn't deny it. How could she, when Rosa was right? Somewhere between the broken bride in the dust and the woman she was now, she'd fallen in love with the silent rancher who'd given her everything and asked for nothing. We'll leave at dawn, Thomas said. It's a hard 3-day ride to Tucson. Can you handle it? I can handle anything, Lydia said, and she meant it. If it means saving Elias. They left before the sun rose, riding 2 of Elias's horses with supplies packed for the journey. Rosa stood on the porch and watched them go, her hand raised in farewell or blessing or both. The ride to Tucson was brutal. The Arizona desert showed no mercy to travelers, and they pushed the horses as hard as they dared, stopping only to water them and grab a few hours of sleep. Thomas talked as they rode, filling in the years they'd been apart. He'd left Philadelphia at 18, unable to bear living under Aunt Margaret's roof any longer. He'd gone west, working cattle drives and mining camps, saving every penny. When he'd finally saved enough to come back for Lydia, she was already gone. "I'm sorry," he said on the second day, his voice rough with emotion. "I should have come back sooner, should have taken you with me when I left. I thought you'd be safe with Aunt Margaret, until I could make something of myself." "You couldn't have known what would happen," Lydia said. "And you're here now. That's what matters." They reached Tucson late on the 3rd day, their horses exhausted and their bodies aching. The town was bigger than Copper Ridge, loud and busy, and full of the kind of rough men who came west looking for fortune or freedom, or just a place to disappear. Thomas led them to a boarding house run by a widow who asked no questions and took their money without comment. They had one single day, before Elias's trial was set to begin. "The saloon where I heard Reed talking," Thomas said as they stood in their rented room, planning their next move. "It's called the Silver Dollar. We go there tonight, find the men who were there that night, convince them to testify. And if they won't, then we find another way. We don't stop until we've saved him, Lydia. I promise you that." The Silver Dollar was exactly what Lydia expected. Dark, smoky, full of men who looked like they'd knife you for $1 and not lose sleep over it. She drew stares as they entered, a woman in a saloon being unusual enough to warrant attention. But Thomas stayed close to her side, his hand never far from the knife at his belt. "There," he said, nodding toward a table in the back. "Those 3. They were here the night Reed was talking." They approached carefully. The men looked up as they arrived, their expressions ranging from curious to hostile. "Help you?" one of them asked. He was older, maybe 50, with a face like cracked leather and shrewd eyes. "My name's Thomas Rowan. I was here about 2 weeks ago, same night you were. There was a man named Marcus Reed bragging about lying to federal marshals for money." The men exchanged glances. "So?" another said. "So an innocent man is about to be tried for murder based on Reed's lies. And I need people who heard Reed's confession to testify to the truth." "Testify? Against federal marshals?" The first man laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Boy, you must think we're stupid. You don't cross men with that kind of power unless you've got a death wish." "Please," Lydia spoke up, and all 3 men turned to look at her. "The man they arrested, Elias Carter, he saved my life. He gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. He's a good man, and he doesn't deserve to hang for something he didn't do." "That's real touching, miss," the older man said. "But it ain't our problem." "Isn't it?" Thomas leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "How many times have you seen good men destroyed by corrupt systems? How many times have you watched the powerful get away with whatever they want while regular folks suffer? Here's a chance to actually do something about it, to make sure justice happens instead of just standing by and letting another innocent man die." The men were silent, considering. Finally, the third one, younger than the others, with a face that suggested he still had some conscience left, spoke up. "What would we have to do?" Hope flared in Lydia's chest. "Just tell the truth. Tell the court what you heard Reed say, that's all. And if the marshals come after us for it, then you'll have done the right thing," Thomas said, "and you'll be able to sleep at night knowing you saved an innocent man's life." How many people can say that? More silence. Then the older man sighed and pushed back his chair. "All right, I'll testify, but if this goes sideways, boy, you better be ready to face the consequences." "I am," Thomas said. Thank you. The other 2 agreed as well, though with obvious reluctance. They arranged to meet at the courthouse the next morning, and Lydia and Thomas left the saloon walking on air. "We did it," Lydia breathed. "We actually did it." "Not yet," Thomas cautioned. "We still have to convince the judge to hear their testimony. Still have to prove Reed was lying. But it's a start." They barely slept that night, too keyed up with anxiety and hope and fear. When dawn broke, they were already dressed and ready, standing outside the courthouse when the doors opened. The courtroom was surprisingly full. Apparently, news of Elias Carter's trial had drawn spectators from all over the territory, some curious, some bloodthirsty, all eager to see whether the rancher who'd supposedly hired a killer would hang. Elias was brought in wearing chains, and Lydia's heart broke at the sight of him. He looked thinner, paler, like 3 weeks in custody had aged him 5 years. But when his eyes found hers across the courtroom, something in his expression shifted. Surprise. Hope. Something that might have been love. The judge was a hard-faced man named Caldwell, who looked like he'd never smiled in his life. The prosecutor was young and ambitious, clearly eager to make a name for himself by convicting a murderer. Elias's court-appointed lawyer was old and tired and already looked defeated. The trial began with Marcus Reed taking the stand. He told his story with practiced ease, how Elias had approached him in Tucson, how he'd described in detail what Hughes had done to Evelyn, how he'd paid Reed $500 up front to kill the man who'd destroyed his wife. "And did you accept this offer?" the prosecutor asked. "No, sir," Reed said, looking properly scandalized. "I'm no killer. I told Mr. Carter I wanted no part of it, but he said if I didn't do it, he'd find someone else who would." "Liar," Elias said quietly, but the judge silenced him with a sharp look. "Did you report this conversation to the authorities?" "Not at first. I was scared, to be honest. Scared of what Mr. Carter might do if I betrayed him. But when I heard about the Hughes murders, both of them, with that message written in blood, I knew I had to come forward." It was a convincing performance. Even Lydia, who knew it was all lies, could see how the jury was responding, their expressions hardening against Elias. Then it was the defense's turn, and Elias's exhausted lawyer stood slowly. "Mr. Reed, have you ever been convicted of a crime?" "Objection," the prosecutor said immediately. "The witness is not on trial here." "Sustained," Judge Caldwell said. The lawyer tried a few more questions, but Reed deflected them all with ease. By the time he stepped down, the damage was done. The prosecutor called a few more witnesses, people who testified that Elias had hated Hughes, that he'd been heard making threats, that he was a violent man with a grudge. It was all circumstantial, but it was building toward a picture of guilt that would be hard to overcome. When the prosecution rested, Elias's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, the defense calls Thomas Rowan." Thomas took the stand, and Lydia held her breath as he was sworn in. He told the court about hearing Reed in the saloon, about the man's boasts of lying for money. The prosecutor tried to tear him apart on cross-examination, suggesting he was simply trying to help his sister save her lover, but Thomas stayed calm and consistent. "I have no reason to lie," he said. "I'd never met Elias Carter before 3 days ago. I'm just telling the court what I heard." Then the 3 men from the Silver Dollar testified, one by one. The prosecutor tried to discredit them. They were drunks, criminals, unreliable witnesses, but they held firm. All 3 told the same story, and even Judge Caldwell looked intrigued. "Mr. Reed," the judge said, calling him back to the stand, "you've heard these testimonies. Do you have a response?" Reed's confidence had slipped. He looked nervous now, trapped. "They're lying. They must be. They're friends of Carter's, or—" "We've never met Elias Carter," one of the saloon men called out. "We're just telling the truth." The courtroom erupted in whispers, and the judge had to bang his gavel for order. "Marshal Webb," he said, "I'd like to know how you came to have Marcus Reed as a witness in the first place." Webb stood, his face stony. "Reed came to us, Your Honor, said he had information about the Hughes murders." "And did you verify his story? Investigate his background? Check whether he had any reason to fabricate testimony?" "We followed standard procedures." "That's not what I asked." Judge Caldwell's voice was sharp. "Did you verify his story?" Webb was silent, and that silence was damning. The trial recessed for lunch, and Lydia managed to catch a moment with Elias as he was being led back to his cell. "Lydia," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion, "you came. You..." Of course I came. Did you really think I'd just let them hang you without a fight? You've done so much. You and your brother. I don't know how to. Then don't, she interrupted. Don't try to thank me or repay me or whatever you're thinking. Just stay alive. Come home. That's all I want. He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw everything he couldn't say in his eyes. Then the marshal pulled him away, and Lydia was left standing in the courthouse hallway, her heart racing. The afternoon session brought the final witnesses. Elias took the stand in his own defense, and despite the exhaustion and fear, he spoke clearly and firmly. I never met Marcus Reed, he said. I never hired anyone to kill Nathaniel Hughes. And while I can't say I'm sorry he's dead, that man destroyed my wife and faced no consequences. I didn't kill him. I'm not a murderer. Then who did kill him? The prosecutor demanded. Who else would have motive? Who else would write for Evelyn in blood? I don't know, Elias admitted. But just because I don't have an answer doesn't mean I'm guilty. The prosecutor tried to tear him apart, but Elias stayed steady. He told the truth about Evelyn, about Hughes, about the 3 years of grief and guilt he'd carried, and the jury listened. Then came the moment that changed everything. The courtroom doors opened and an elderly woman walked in, leaning heavily on a cane. She was small, dressed in black, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, and despite her age and apparent frailty, she moved with purpose. Your Honor, she said in a voice that carried despite its softness, I apologize for the interruption, but I have information relevant to this case. Judge Caldwell frowned. And you are? My name is Rosa Delgado. I was housekeeper for Nathaniel Hughes, and I killed him. The courtroom exploded. People were on their feet, shouting, demanding answers. The judge banged his gavel furiously, calling for order, and the marshals moved to take Rosa into custody. Wait, she commanded, and something in her voice made them pause. I will come with you willingly, but first, let me speak. Let me tell the truth. Caldwell looked torn between maintaining order and his obvious curiosity. Finally, he nodded. Proceed, but make it quick. Rosa took the stand, was sworn in, and began to speak. Her voice was steady, but Lydia could see tears tracking down her weathered cheeks. I worked for the Hughes family for 30 years, she said. I cleaned their house, cooked their meals, raised their children. I knew every secret, every sin, every crime they tried to hide. And the greatest crime was what Nathaniel Hughes did to young women. He would pursue them, hunt them, trap them, and when they resisted, he would destroy them. Evelyn Carter was not his first victim. She was not even his 10th. The courtroom was utterly silent now. My own daughter, Rosa continued, her voice breaking, was one of them. 20 years ago, when she was just 17, Hughes violated her, then paid men to say she'd seduced him. She hung herself from shame and despair, just like Evelyn Carter did, just like so many others. And so you killed him? Judge Caldwell asked quietly. Yes. I waited 20 years for justice. It never came. So I made my own. She straightened in her chair, dignity radiating from her despite everything. I knew where he kept his guns. I knew his habits, his schedule. I went to his study at night when he was drinking, and I shot him twice. Once for my daughter, once for Evelyn, and all the others. And Mrs. Hughes. Rosa's expression hardened. Margaret knew. She knew what her husband did, and she protected him. She paid off witnesses, threatened victims, ensured her husband never faced consequences. She was as guilty as he was, so yes, I killed her too. The message on the mirror, the prosecutor said. For Evelyn. Why? Because Evelyn's death is what finally gave me courage. When I learned that Elias was being blamed, that he would hang for my actions, I knew I had to come forward. He is a good man who has suffered enough, and I am an old woman who is tired of carrying secrets and shame. She looked directly at Elias. I am sorry. I did not mean for you to suffer for my justice. Rosa, no, Elias said, his voice breaking. You don't have to. Yes, I do, she said gently. You saved Lydia. You gave her sanctuary and healing. You are building something good from the ashes of tragedy. I will not let that be destroyed. She turned back to the judge. I am ready to accept the consequences of my actions. I killed 2 people, and I do not deny it. Do with me what you will." The courtroom was in chaos again, but this time Judge Caldwell didn't bother trying to restore order. He just sat there, looking at Rosa with something that might have been respect in his hard eyes. "Marshal Webb," he said finally, "place Mrs. Delgado under arrest, and release Elias Carter immediately. All charges are dropped." Elias's chains were removed right there in the courtroom, and Lydia was running before she even realized she'd moved. She threw herself into his arms, and he caught her, holding her like she was the only solid thing in a world gone mad. "I thought I'd lost you," she sobbed into his shirt. "I thought they were going to hang you, and I couldn't." "I'm here," he murmured, his arms tight around her. "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." Behind them, Rosa was being led away in chains, and she was smiling. They wouldn't let Lydia see Rosa that night. The marshals had taken her to a cell in the federal building, and visitors were strictly forbidden until after her arraignment. But Lydia stood outside that cold stone building until well past midnight, as if her presence alone could somehow protect the woman who had sacrificed everything to save Elias. Thomas finally convinced her to leave, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "She made her choice, Lydia, and it was made with open eyes. You can't take that away from her by refusing to honor it." "She shouldn't have had to make that choice," Lydia said, her voice raw. "None of this should have happened. Not to Evelyn, not to Rosa's daughter, not to any of them." "No," Thomas agreed. "But it did. And now all we can do is make sure their stories are heard. Make sure people know the truth about what Nathaniel Hughes was." Elias had been silent through most of this, standing a few feet away with his hat in his hands, staring at the federal building like he could see through its walls to the woman imprisoned inside. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with grief. "She knew," he said. "All these weeks, Rosa knew who killed Hughes, and she said nothing. Let me get arrested, let me face trial, nearly let me hang before she came forward. She was protecting you," Lydia said. "If she'd confessed earlier, people might have thought you put her up to it, might have said you manipulated an old woman into taking the fall. By waiting, by letting the trial play out, she made sure no one could doubt her confession was real. That doesn't make it right." "No," Lydia agreed, "but it makes it hers. Her choice, her justice, her consequences. We have to respect that, even if it breaks our hearts." They returned to the boarding house in heavy silence. Thomas excused himself to his own room, leaving Lydia and Elias alone in the narrow hallway. They stood there for a long moment, neither quite knowing what to say now that the immediate crisis had passed. "You saved my life," Elias said finally. "You and your brother. If you hadn't come to Tucson, if you hadn't found those witnesses—" "You saved mine first," Lydia interrupted, "on that dusty street in Copper Ridge, when you could have just walked away like everyone else did." "That was different." "How?" "Because you were innocent. You deserved to be saved. He stopped, his jaw clenching. "I've been carrying guilt for 3 years, Lydia. Guilt that I couldn't protect Evelyn, that I didn't see what was happening until it was too late. That I survived when she didn't. Maybe I deserve to hang for that." "No." Lydia's voice was fierce, and she grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "You didn't kill Evelyn. Hughes did. And you didn't deserve to die for his crimes any more than she did. Rosa knew that. That's why she came forward." Elias looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the war raging behind his eyes. The guilt, the grief, the desperate need to believe her warring with 3 years of self-blame. "I don't know how to let it go," he whispered. "The guilt, the anger. It's been with me so long, I don't know who I am without it." "Then maybe it's time to find out," Lydia said gently. She reached up and touched his face, her palm resting against his rough cheek. "You're not the man who failed Evelyn, Elias. You're the man who saved me, who gave me back my life, my dignity, my hope. That's who you are. That's who you've always been." He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch like a man dying of thirst finally finding water. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "I don't deserve you," he said. "Good thing I'm not asking for permission." The laugh that broke from him was half sob, but it was real, and Lydia counted that as a victory. She let her hand fall, but he caught it, holding it between both of his. "Thank you," he said, "for everything, for believing in me when no one else did, for fighting when I couldn't, For, his voice broke, for being here. Where else would I be? They stood there in the dim hallway, holding hands like teenagers, until Thomas cleared his throat from his doorway. Not to interrupt whatever this is, he said, trying and failing to hide a smile, but we should probably get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He was right. Rosa's arraignment was scheduled for 10 in the morning, and the news of her confession had spread through Tucson like wildfire. By the time they reached the courthouse, a crowd had already gathered. Reporters with their notebooks, curious onlookers, and a surprising number of women, all dressed in somber colors, all watching with expressions that ranged from grief to grim satisfaction. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Judge Caldwell presided again, his hard face giving nothing away. Rosa was brought in wearing the same clothes she'd worn the day before, and Lydia's heart broke at how small and frail she looked in the harsh morning light. The charges were read. 2 counts of first-degree murder. Rosa pleaded guilty to both without hesitation. "Mrs. Delgado," Judge Caldwell said, "do you understand that by pleading guilty, you are waiving your right to a trial? That you are accepting full responsibility for these crimes?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you do this of your own free will? No one has coerced or threatened you?" "No one. This is my choice." "Very well." Caldwell shuffled his papers. "Before I pass sentence, does the defendant wish to make a statement?" Rosa stood, leaning heavily on the table in front of her. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the packed courtroom. "I killed Nathaniel Hughes because he was a monster who destroyed lives and faced no consequences. I killed Margaret Hughes because she enabled his monstrosity and protected him from justice. I do not regret these actions. I only regret that I did not act sooner, before more women suffered." A murmur ran through the crowd, but Caldwell silenced it with a look. "I am an old woman," Rosa continued. "I have few years left, and I choose to spend them knowing that I finally made Hughes answer for his crimes, that I protected a good man from being punished for my actions, that I spoke truth in a world that too often silences women's voices." She turned to look at Elias, and her eyes were soft. "You gave my life meaning at the end, Mr. Carter. You and Lydia. You showed me that there is still goodness in this world, still people worth protecting. I'm not sorry for what I did. I am only sorry I could not have done more." She sat back down and the courtroom erupted. Women were standing, some crying, some calling out their support. Men looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats. The reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. Judge Caldwell banged his gavel repeatedly, finally restoring order. His face was unreadable as he looked at Rosa. "Mrs. Delgado, you have confessed to 2 murders. The law is clear on this matter. However," he paused, and something that might have been conflict flickered across his features. "However, this court has also heard testimony about the victims' characters, about crimes that were committed but never prosecuted, about a system that failed to protect the vulnerable." He was silent for a long moment, the courtroom holding its breath. "Rosa Delgado, I hereby sentence you to life imprisonment, to be served at the territorial prison. However, given your age and health, and the extenuating circumstances of this case, I am recommending that the governor consider clemency. That is all I can do within the bounds of the law." "It is more than enough, Your Honor," Rosa said quietly. "Thank you." They took her away then, and this time Lydia was allowed a brief moment to say goodbye. She held Rosa's weathered hands and tried to find words adequate to express what she felt: gratitude, grief, respect, love. "Do not cry for me, mi hija," Rosa said, smiling despite the chains on her wrists. "I am at peace. For the first time in 20 years, I am at peace. I'll write to you," Lydia promised, "every week, and I'll visit as often as they'll let me. You will do no such thing. You will live your life. You will love Elias the way he deserves to be loved. You will build something beautiful from all this ugliness. That is how you honor me, not with visits to a prison cell, but with joy, with healing, with happiness." She was led away before Lydia could argue, disappearing into the depths of the courthouse, and Lydia stood there with tears streaming down her face and Thomas's arm around her shoulders. "She's right, you know," Thomas said gently. "The best way to honor what she did is to actually live the life she helped you save." "I know," Lydia whispered, "but it feels wrong. Like we're just going on while she suffers. She's not suffering, Elias said, and when Lydia turned, she saw understanding in his eyes. She's free. Maybe for the first time since her daughter died. We can't take that away from her by refusing to accept it. The ride back to Copper Ridge took 4 days this time, slower and more careful. They stopped at small towns along the way, and everywhere they went, people were talking about Rosa Delgado and the Hughes murders. The story had spread like wildfire across the territory, and opinions were violently divided. Some called Rosa a murderer who deserved to hang. Others called her a hero who had done what the law refused to do. Women, especially, seemed to understand what had driven her to such desperate action. More than once, Lydia heard women talking in hushed voices about their own experiences with men like Hughes, their own stories of assault and harassment, and the justice that never came. This is going to change things, Thomas said one night as they camped under the stars. Rosa's confession, the trial, all of it. People are talking about things that used to stay hidden, about the way powerful men get away with hurting women, about how the system protects the wrong people. Will it be enough? Lydia asked. Will it actually change anything, or will people just talk for a while and then forget? I don't know, Thomas admitted, but it's a start. And sometimes that's all you can ask for. Elias, who had been silent through most of the journey, staring at the desert landscape like he was seeing it for the first time, finally spoke. Evelyn would have liked Rosa, would have appreciated what she did, even if she'd never have asked for it. Tell me about her, Lydia said. About Evelyn. Not the sad parts. Tell me who she was when she was happy. Elias was quiet for so long that Lydia thought he might not answer. But then, slowly, carefully, he began to talk. About a young woman who loved to dance, who collected wildflowers and pressed them in books, who could make even the simplest meal feel like a celebration, who had dreams of turning the ranch into something grand, who wanted children running through the house, who believed in goodness and hope even when the world gave her precious little reason to. She deserved better, he finished quietly. Deserved a better husband, a better life, a better death. She had a husband who loved her, Lydia said, who honored her memory even when it cost him everything, who carried her pain and her story when the world tried to forget. That's not nothing, Elias. He looked at her across the campfire, and something in his expression had shifted. The guilt was still there. It would probably always be there, but it was tempered now by something else. Acceptance, maybe. Or the beginning of healing. I'm tired of being haunted, he said. Tired of living in the past, of letting grief consume everything. But I don't know how to let go. Maybe you don't have to let go, Thomas suggested. Maybe you just have to make room for something else alongside it. Honor the past while still building a future. Is that what you did? Elias asked. After your parents died? Thomas smiled sadly. I tried. Some days were better than others, but having Lydia helped, having someone to protect, someone to live for. It gave me purpose when grief threatened to drown me. He stood, stretching. I'm going to check on the horses. You two should get some sleep. We've got another long day tomorrow. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving Lydia and Elias alone by the dying fire. The desert night was cold, and Lydia shivered, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. Come here, Elias said, and when she hesitated, he added, Please, I need to know you're real, that this isn't some dream I'm going to wake up from. She moved to sit beside him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They sat like that for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the desert night sounds, just breathing together. When we get back to the ranch, Elias said eventually, things are going to be different. People will know the truth now, about Hughes, about Evelyn. The gossip will change, but it won't stop. They'll find new things to whisper about. Let them whisper, Lydia said. I'm done caring what people think. Are you sure? Because being with me, staying at the ranch, building a life there, it's not going to be easy. There will always be people who judge, who talk, who try to tear us down. Then we'll build strong enough that they can't, Lydia said simply. She pulled back to look at him, and in the firelight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. I'm not afraid of hard work, Elias. I'm not afraid of gossip. The only thing I'm afraid of is wasting this second chance we've been given. This opportunity to build something real. Is that what you want? Something real? With me? Yes, she said, and she'd never been more certain of anything in her life. If you want it too. Instead of answering with words, he kissed her. It was gentle, careful, a question asked and answered all at once. When they finally pulled apart, they were both trembling. I want it, he said, his forehead resting against hers. God help me. I want it more than I've wanted anything in years. But Lydia, I'm broken. I'm carrying damage that might never fully heal. I don't know if I can be the man you deserve. Then be the man you are, she said, broken parts and all, because that's who I fell in love with. The words hung between them, huge and terrifying and absolutely true. Elias pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching hers in the dim light. Say that again. I love you, Lydia said, and saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff and learning to fly at the same time. I love you, Elias Carter. Your strength, your kindness, your quiet honor, the way you gave me safety when I had none, the way you see me as a person, not property, all of it. I love all of it. Lydia, he breathed, and then he was kissing her again, deeper this time, more certain. And for the first time since Evelyn's death, Elias Carter let himself hope that maybe, just maybe, happiness was still possible. They returned to Copper Ridge on a Thursday afternoon, dusty and exhausted and fundamentally changed. Word of Rosa's confession and Elias's exoneration had reached the town ahead of them, and the reception they received was markedly different from the suspicion and gossip that had plagued them before. Mrs. Henderson met them outside the general store, tears in her eyes. Mr. Carter, I'm so sorry. We should have believed you about Evelyn, should have listened when you tried to tell us the truth. It's in the past, Elias said, though his voice was tight. No, it's not, Mrs. Henderson insisted. What Hughes did, what he got away with for so long, that's on all of us. We enabled him by looking the other way. We protected him by choosing to believe his lies over your truth. That blood is on our hands, too. Other townspeople approached with similar sentiments, their guilt and shame palpable. Some were sincere, genuinely remorseful for the way they'd treated Elias. Others seemed more concerned with being on the right side now that public opinion had shifted. Sheriff Briggs pulled Elias aside, his expression grave. There's been developments about Hughes. Since Rosa's confession came out, 9 other women have come forward. 9 women who say Hughes assaulted or harassed them over the years. Some of their stories go back decades. 9, Elias repeated, his voice hollow. That we know of. Could be more who aren't ready to talk yet. Briggs looked older, more tired. Margaret Hughes's family is threatening lawsuits, trying to suppress the stories. But it's too late. The truth is out now, and it's uglier than anyone imagined. Good, Elias said flatly. Let it be ugly. Let everyone see what kind of man they were protecting. The ranch, when they finally reached it, looked exactly the same as when they'd left. The same weathered buildings, the same endless desert stretching to the horizon, the same windmill turning slowly in the breeze. But somehow it felt different now, lighter, like a weight had been lifted that Lydia hadn't even realized was there. Thomas stayed for 3 more days, helping with ranch work and getting to know Elias properly. The 2 men circled each other warily at first, but by the 2nd day they'd found an easy rhythm, working side by side in companionable silence punctuated by occasional conversation. You take care of her, Smus, Thomas said on his last evening, sitting with Elias on the porch while Lydia cooked dinner inside. My sister. She's stronger than she looks, but she's been hurt badly. By our aunt, by Crenshaw, by life in general. She deserves gentleness. She'll have it, Elias promised, for as long as she wants to stay. She'll stay, Thomas said with certainty. She loves you, and Lydia doesn't love lightly or easily. When she gives her heart, it's forever. I don't deserve it. Probably not, but you've got it anyway. Don't waste it. Thomas stood, stretching. I need to head back east soon, got a job waiting in Colorado, but I'll come back to visit, and if you ever hurt her, you'll make me regret it. I know. Elias extended his hand. Thank you. For everything you did. For saving my life. Thomas shook his hand firmly. You saved hers first. I figure we're even." They said their goodbyes the next morning, Lydia crying despite her best efforts not to. "I'll write," she promised, "every week." "You better. And if you need anything, anything at all, you send word. I'll come running." He rode away, turning in his saddle to wave one last time before disappearing over the ridge. Lydia stood watching long after he'd gone, and Elias came up behind her, his hand settling gently on her shoulder. "You all right?" "I will be," she said. "It's just hard, saying goodbye." "He'll be back, and in the meantime you've got me." She turned to face him, a smile breaking through her tears. "Yes, I do, don't I?" The weeks that followed developed their own rhythm, different from before but no less comfortable. They worked the ranch together now, Lydia proving herself surprisingly adept at ranch work despite her city upbringing. She learned to ride, to rope, to read the weather and the cattle with equal skill. She expanded her garden, turning it into something approaching a proper farm, growing vegetables and herbs that she sold in town along with her preserves and baked goods. Money was tight, it always was on a small ranch, but they made it work through careful planning and hard labor. And slowly, tentatively, the community that had shunned Elias began to accept him again. Not everyone, certainly. There were still those who believed he must have been involved somehow, or who resented him for making them confront uncomfortable truths about a man they'd respected. But enough people came around that life became bearable again. 2 months after Rosa's confession, news came that she'd died in prison. Heart failure, the official report said, brought on by her advanced age and stress. She'd lived just long enough to see her story spread across the territory, to know that her actions had sparked a larger conversation about justice and accountability, and the ways powerful men escaped consequences. The funeral was small, just Lydia, Elias, and a handful of women from Copper Ridge and the surrounding towns, women who had never known Rosa personally, but who understood what she represented. They buried her in the town cemetery, not far from where Evelyn lay, and the priest spoke about sacrifice and justice, and the complicated morality of desperate acts. "She shouldn't have had to die in prison," Lydia said afterward, standing at the grave while the other mourners drifted away. "She should have been here, should have seen what her courage inspired." "She knew," Elias said quietly, "in that courtroom when all those women stood up in support, when the reporters wrote their stories and people started talking about change. She knew. And I think that was enough for her." They stood there for a long time, paying their respects to a woman who had saved them both in different ways. Finally, Elias spoke again, his voice hesitant. "There's something I need to do, something I've been putting off for 3 years." "What?" He led her to another grave, this one with a simple headstone that read, "Evelyn Carter, beloved wife, 1852 to 1878. "I need to say goodbye," Elias said. "Really say goodbye. Not the guilty, angry goodbye I've been carrying, but a real one, the kind that lets both of us move forward." Lydia squeezed his hand. "Do you want me to leave?" "No, stay, please." He knelt by the grave and Lydia heard him draw a shaky breath. "Evelyn," he said, and his voice cracked on her name. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. Sorry I didn't see what Hughes was doing until it was too late. Sorry I let you suffer alone because you were trying to protect me. I've carried that guilt for 3 years, and it nearly destroyed me." The desert wind whispered through the cemetery, carrying the scent of sage and dust. "But I can't carry it anymore, Saya," Elias continued. "Rosa helped me see that. And Lydia. You'd like her, Ev. She's strong like you were. Brave like you were. She's been hurt, but she's healing, and she's helping me heal too." He reached out and touched the headstone, his hand lingering on the carved letters. "I'm going to move forward now. Not forget you, never forget you, but stop letting grief consume everything. I'm going to build a life with Lydia. A good life. The kind of life you wanted for this ranch. And I'm going to honor your memory by making sure your story is never forgotten, by fighting so that what happened to you never happens to anyone else." Tears were streaming down his face now, but he was smiling through them. "Thank you for the years we had. Thank you for loving me even when I was difficult and distant. Thank you for being braver than I knew. I love you, Evelyn. I'll always love you. But it's time to say goodbye." He stood, and Lydia moved into his arms, holding him while he cried, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of his soul. She held him until the storm passed, until his breathing steadied and the tears slowed. "Come on," she said gently. "Let's go home." That evening, as the sun set in spectacular shades of orange and purple, Elias found Lydia in the barn. She was brushing down one of the horses, humming softly to herself, and she looked up with a smile when he entered. "Hey, dinner's almost ready. I just needed to marry me." The words hung in the air between them, and Lydia's hand stilled on the brush. "What?" Elias crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Marry me, Lydia. Not because it's proper or expected or because of what people will say, but because I love you. Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because when I think about the future, you're in every vision of it." "Elias, I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few months. I know I'm still damaged and grieving and probably not the best choice you could make. But I also know that life is short and unpredictable, and I don't want to waste another moment of it pretending I don't want this, want you, want us." Lydia was crying now, but she was smiling too. "You're proposing to me in a barn. The same barn where Evelyn died, where I thought I'd lost everything, seemed right somehow, to build something new in the same place where so much ended." "Yes," Lydia said, and she was laughing through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you, in a barn or a church, or the middle of the desert. I don't care where, as long as it's you." He kissed her then, deep and long and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, the future stretched before them bright and uncertain and absolutely worth fighting for. They were married a month later, and this time the whole town came. The wedding took place on a Saturday in late October, when the brutal Arizona heat had finally given way to something approaching comfortable, and the desert bloomed with unexpected wildflowers after a rare autumn rain. Lydia wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson and 3 other women from town had sewn together, cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, nothing like the elaborate wedding gown she'd worn for Walter Crenshaw. This dress was simple, honest, made with love by women who had finally chosen to stand with her instead of against her. "You look beautiful," Thomas said, having ridden back from Colorado for the occasion. He stood with her in the small room behind the church, adjusting his collar nervously. "Are you sure about this? Because if you're not, we can leave right now. I've got 2 horses ready and—" "I'm sure," Lydia said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "More sure than I've ever been about anything. He's a good man. I'll give him that. But marriage is—" "I know what marriage can be," Lydia interrupted gently. "I learned that with Crenshaw, but I also know what it should be, what it will be with Elias. Partnership, respect, love freely given, not demanded or taken by force." Thomas studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but if he won't. And if somehow the world turns upside down and he does, I'm strong enough now to save myself. You helped teach me that." The church was packed, not just with people from Copper Ridge, but from surrounding towns and ranches, people who had read about Rose's confession and Elias's exoneration and wanted to witness what came next. Women especially had come in numbers that surprised everyone, dressed in their finest clothes, many of them wearing small purple ribbons pinned to their dresses, a symbol that had emerged in the weeks after Rose's trial, representing solidarity with women who had suffered at the hands of powerful men. Elias stood at the altar with Miguel beside him as his best man, and when Lydia appeared in the doorway, the expression on his face made her heart stutter. He looked at her like she was the answer to a prayer he hadn't known how to speak, like she was hope personified, like she was everything good that he'd thought the world had stopped making. She walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm, past faces both friendly and skeptical, past whispers that ranged from supportive to scandalized. She didn't care. Her eyes were locked on Elias, on the man who had given her back her life and was now offering to share his. The ceremony was simple. Pastor Williams, who had buried Evelyn 3 years ago and had been one of the few people who'd never quite believed the gossip about Elias, spoke about second chances and the courage it takes to build something new from the ashes of tragedy. He spoke about love as a choice, made daily, especially when times were hard. He spoke about community and forgiveness and the responsibility everyone shared to protect the vulnerable. When it came time for vows, Elias took Lydia's hands and spoke in a voice that was steady despite the emotion shining in his eyes. "Lydia Rowan, I was a broken man when you came into my life, haunted by ghosts, consumed by guilt, barely surviving each day. You gave me a reason to heal, a reason to hope, a reason to believe that maybe I deserved a future after all." He paused, swallowing hard. "I can't promise you an easy life. This ranch is hard work, money's always tight, and I'm still carrying damage that may never fully heal. But I can promise you respect, partnership, a home where you're safe, valued, and loved. I can promise you every day of my life, for as long as I have days to give. That's my vow to you." Lydia's vision blurred with tears, but her voice was clear when she responded. "Elias Carter, when you found me in that dusty street, I was more than broken. I was erased. I had forgotten who I was, what I was worth, whether I even deserved to exist. You saw me when everyone else looked away. You gave me dignity when the world had stripped me of it. You treated me like a person when others saw only property." She squeezed his hands. "I promise to build a life with you, to work beside you, laugh with you, grieve with you when grief comes. I promise to honor both the man you are and the man you're still becoming. I promise to remember that love isn't ownership, it's freedom chosen daily. That's my vow to you." Pastor Williams smiled. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona and by God Almighty, I pronounce you husband and wife. Elias, you may kiss your bride." And he did, gentle and reverent and full of promise. While the church erupted in applause and the women in purple ribbons stood as one, their silent support a wall of solidarity that said, "We see you, we honor you, we stand with you." The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food brought by seemingly everyone in attendance. There was music. Miguel played guitar while others joined in with fiddles and harmonicas, and dancing and laughter and the kind of joy that comes when people choose hope over cynicism. But there were also tensions. Not everyone who came was supportive. Clint Marlowe, the saloon owner who had been one of Elias's loudest critics, stood off to the side with a group of men, their expressions sour, their comments just loud enough to be heard. "Still say there's something wrong about all this," Marlowe muttered. "Man gets accused of murder. Suddenly a convenient confession appears, and now he's married to the girl he was living with in sin? Too neat." "Maybe it's neat because it's true," said a woman's voice, sharp and clear. Margaret Hughes, no relation to Nathaniel, stepped forward from the crowd. She was a widow herself, maybe 40, with steel-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. "Maybe sometimes the truth actually is simple. Bad man does bad things. Good man tries to survive. Justice eventually comes, even if it's messy." "And you believe that?" Marlowe challenged. "You believe Rosa Delgado just happened to kill Hughes right when Carter was at his lowest?" "I believe Rosa Delgado waited 20 years for justice that never came," Margaret said coldly. "I believe she watched her daughter die because of what Nathaniel Hughes did to her. I believe she saw Evelyn Carter die for the same reason, and I believe she finally said enough. That's what I believe." She turned to address the gathering crowd, her voice carrying. "My husband was killed by Hughes, too. Not literally. Hughes didn't pull a trigger. But he destroyed my husband's business out of spite, drove him to drink, and eventually my husband's heart just gave out from the stress. So don't talk to me about neat coincidences. Hughes was poison, and Rosa Delgado was the antidote that came too late for most of us, but just in time for some." The silence that followed was profound. Then slowly, other women began to speak. Women who had their own stories, their own scars, their own reasons to be grateful that Nathaniel Hughes was dead. Sarah Mitchell told of how Hughes had cornered her at a church social when she was 16, his hands invasive, his breath reeking of whiskey and entitlement. Catherine Brennan spoke of her sister, who had worked as a maid in the Hughes household and been dismissed without references after she rejected his advances, making it impossible for her to find work anywhere in the territory. Elizabeth Cobb, usually so reserved, stood with shaking hands and described how Hughes had spread vicious rumors about her when she'd rebuffed him, rumors that had destroyed her engagement and left her effectively unmarriageable for years. One by one, they spoke their truths, and the men who had been so quick to defend Hughes's memory found themselves increasingly uncomfortable, increasingly outnumbered, increasingly forced to confront the reality that they had protected a monster. Lydia watched all this unfold from Elias's side, his arm around her waist, and felt something shift in the very air itself. This was more than a wedding reception. It was a reckoning. A moment when silence broke and truth spilled out like water from a cracked dam. When the last woman had spoken, Pastor Williams stepped forward, his face grave. I married Nathaniel and Margaret Hughes 30 years ago. I baptized their children. I took their money for church repairs and new hymnals. And I'm ashamed. His voice cracked. I'm ashamed that I didn't see what was happening, that I didn't listen when women tried to tell me, that I chose comfort over courage, silence over truth. I failed in my duty as a shepherd of this community, and I am profoundly sorry. It wasn't enough. No apology could undo decades of harm, but it was something. A beginning of accountability, of change, of the hard work of rebuilding trust. Clint Marlowe and his companions left shortly after, their faces dark with anger and embarrassment. But they left quietly, and Lydia counted that as a small victory. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually the guests departed, leaving Lydia and Elias alone in the house that was now truly theirs together. They stood on the porch watching the last wagon disappear into the darkness, the desert night cool and peaceful around them. That was quite a day, Elias said quietly. Yes, it was. I'm sorry it got complicated, that people used our wedding as a platform to— Don't, Lydia interrupted. Don't apologize for women finally being heard, for truth finally being spoken. That's exactly what should have happened. He pulled her closer, and they stood there in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the desert. I love you, he said finally. In case I haven't said it enough today. You've said it exactly the right amount, but I'll never get tired of hearing it. They went inside together, to the room that had been his and Evelyn's but was now theirs. Lydia had insisted on this, on claiming the space and filling it with new memories rather than avoiding it like a shrine. She'd changed things subtly over the past weeks. New curtains, different arrangement of furniture, small touches that made it feel like a beginning rather than a continuation. That night, they learned each other in the language of touch and whispered words, in tenderness and patience, and the kind of intimacy that comes when two broken people choose to be whole together. And when they finally fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the ghosts that had haunted this house for so long seemed to finally rest. The months that followed were not easy. Marriage never is, especially when both parties carry trauma that doesn't disappear just because you speak vows. There were hard days when Elias would retreat into himself, unable to articulate the grief that still ambushed him at unexpected moments. Days when Lydia would flinch at a raised voice or a sudden movement, her body remembering Walter Crenshaw's violence even when her mind knew she was safe. But they learned to navigate these moments together, to give each other space when needed, to offer comfort when it was wanted, to communicate even when, especially when, it was difficult. They learned that healing wasn't linear, that there would be setbacks and struggles, but that commitment meant choosing each other even on the days when it wasn't easy. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Lydia's garden expanded into a proper enterprise, her preserves and baked goods becoming sought-after commodities in Copper Ridge and beyond. Elias took on more cattle, improved the fences, built a new barn with Miguel's help. They saved money carefully, planning for a future that was no longer something to endure but something to build. Thomas visited 3 times that first year, each time staying longer, each time more impressed by what his sister and her husband had created. On his 3rd visit in the spring, he brought news. There's a movement, he said, sitting at their kitchen table over coffee. Women organizing, demanding legal protections, anti-assault laws with actual teeth, the right to testify in court without being dismissed as hysterical or unreliable. Rosa's case, it sparked something. People are angry, and they're channeling that anger into action. Will it work? Lydia asked. Will laws actually change? Eventually. Maybe not this year or next, but eventually. Because stories like yours, like Evelyn's, like Rosa's daughters, they're too numerous to ignore anymore. The silence is breaking. In June, Lydia discovered she was pregnant. The news hit her with unexpected force. She'd wanted children, had dreamed of them in some abstract future, but now faced with the reality, she felt terror mixed with joy. She'd lost so much already: parents, home, innocence, years of her life to survival. Could she bring a child into this hard world? Could she be a good mother when her own childhood had been cut short by loss? She waited 3 days before telling Elias, those 3 days spent in private turmoil, wrestling with her fears. Finally, one evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset, she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There's someone new joining the ranch," she said quietly. "In about 7 months." The expressions that crossed Elias's face in rapid succession, shock, fear, wonder, joy, would have been comical if the moment weren't so profound. He stared at her stomach, then at her face, then back at her stomach. We're... He couldn't seem to finish a sentence. "Yes." "Are you happy?" he asked, and the vulnerability in his voice nearly broke her heart. "Because if you're not, if this is something you don't want..." "I'm terrified," Lydia said honestly. "But yes, I'm happy. Are you?" "Terrified too," he admitted. "I don't know how to be a father. Don't know if I'll be any good at it. What if I fail this child the way I failed Evelyn?" "You didn't fail Evelyn. The world failed her. And you won't fail our child because you're asking these questions, because you're aware of the weight of this responsibility." She squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out together. Make mistakes, learn from them, do better. That's all anyone can do." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully like she was made of glass. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trusting me with this, for giving me a future I thought I'd lost forever." The pregnancy was not easy. Lydia suffered from severe nausea in the early months, could barely keep food down, lost weight when she should have been gaining it. Doc Henderson, Mrs. Henderson's husband, made house calls twice a week, monitoring her carefully, prescribing rest and bland foods and patience. "Some women just have a harder time," he said. "Doesn't mean anything's wrong with the baby, just means you're paying the price early." Elias became fiercely protective, refusing to let Lydia do any heavy work, taking over all the household chores in addition to ranch work. He was exhausted constantly, running himself ragged, until Lydia finally put her foot down. "You can't do everything yourself," she said firmly. "You'll collapse, and then where will we be? Hire help. Accept help. Let the community that failed you before actually do something useful now." So they hired a young couple, Daniel and Grace Morrison, who had just arrived in the territory looking for work. Daniel helped with ranch work while Grace took over household duties. And slowly the crushing weight on Elias's shoulders eased. The nausea finally passed in the 4th month, and Lydia bloomed. Her body rounded, her skin glowed, and she felt more herself than she had in months. She took long walks around the ranch, her hand resting on her growing belly, talking to the child she couldn't yet see but already loved fiercely. In her 7th month, a letter arrived. It was addressed to both of them, official-looking with a territorial seal. Elias opened it with trepidation, expecting some new problem, some residual legal issue from the Hughes case. Instead, it was from the governor. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Carter," Elias read aloud, his voice stunned. "It is my privilege to inform you that the territorial legislature has passed the Evelyn Carter Memorial Act, establishing new protections for women against harassment and assault, creating investigative procedures that must be followed when accusations are made, and providing legal representation for victims regardless of their financial circumstances." He paused, his hands shaking. "The act is named after Evelyn." "Keep reading," Lydia urged, tears already streaming down her face. "Furthermore, in recognition of Rosa Delgado's service to this territory and the circumstances that led to her actions, I am issuing a posthumous pardon. While this cannot undo the tragedy of her final months, it is my hope that this action provides some measure of justice and acknowledges that the system failed her, her daughter, and countless other women. The territory owes these women a debt we can never fully repay, but we can honor their memory by ensuring their suffering leads to meaningful change." Elias set the letter down, unable to speak. Lydia moved to him, wrapping her arms around him as best she could with her pregnant belly between them, and they cried together. For Evelyn, for Rosa's daughter, for all the women whose names would never be known but whose suffering had finally led to something resembling justice. "She would have been proud," Lydia whispered. "Evelyn. To know that her story mattered, that her pain wasn't meaningless." "Yeah," Elias managed. Yeah, she would have been. They framed the letter and hung it in the living room, a reminder that even the darkest tragedies could eventually lead to light. Lydia went into labor on a cold January night, 3 weeks earlier than Doc Henderson had predicted. The labor was long, nearly 20 hours, and difficult. There were moments when Elias, pacing outside the bedroom while Mrs. Henderson and Grace attended to Lydia, thought he might lose his mind from helplessness and fear. He'd lost one woman he loved already. The thought that he might lose another, that Lydia might suffer and die bringing his child into the world, was almost more than he could bear. But Lydia was stronger than fear, stronger than pain. She fought through every contraction, every wave of agony, with a determination that awed everyone present. And finally, as dawn broke over the desert in shades of pink and gold, a baby's cry split the air. "It's a girl," Mrs. Henderson announced, opening the door with a tired but triumphant smile. A healthy, perfect little girl, and Lydia's fine. Exhausted, but fine. Elias pushed past her into the room. Lydia lay in the bed, sweaty and pale and absolutely radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. When she looked up at him, her smile was like the sun. "Come meet your daughter," she said. He approached carefully, his legs shaking, and looked down at the impossibly small person in Lydia's arms. She had a shock of dark hair, eyes screwed shut, tiny fists waving indignantly at being thrust into this cold, bright world. "She's perfect," he breathed. "She's absolutely perfect." "Do you want to hold her?" He did, and didn't, terrified he'd do it wrong, break something, cause harm. But Lydia guided his arms into position and carefully transferred the baby into his embrace, and suddenly Elias was holding his daughter and the world had shifted on its axis. "Hello," he whispered to her. "Hello, little one. I'm your father, and I promise, I swear, I will keep you safe. I will teach you to be strong. I will make sure you know you're valued and loved and that you never ever have to accept less than you deserve." The baby opened her eyes, dark like his, but with flecks of blue like Lydia's, and seemed to stare directly at him, judging, weighing, deciding. Then she yawned, a tiny, ridiculous expression, and Elias Carter, tough rancher who'd survived more heartbreak than most men could imagine, fell completely and irrevocably in love. "What should we name her?" he asked, unable to look away from his daughter's face. "I was thinking," Lydia said carefully, "Rosa Evelyn Carter, to honor the women who saved us, the women whose courage gave us this chance." Elias looked at his wife, this extraordinary woman who had come into his life broken and beaten and had somehow found the strength to heal them both, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Rosa Evelyn Carter," he repeated. "It's perfect. She's perfect." The baby, Rosa, made a small sound of agreement, or possibly gas, and they both laughed, giddy with exhaustion and joy and relief. The next weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless feedings and the particular chaos that comes with new parenthood. Elias discovered reserves of patience he didn't know he possessed, walking the floors at 3 a.m. with a crying baby, changing diapers with fumbling hands, learning to function on 3 hours of sleep stitched together from 20-minute increments. Lydia recovered slowly, her body needing time to heal from the ordeal of childbirth. She was frustrated by her weakness, by how difficult simple tasks had become. But Elias and Grace formed a tag team that kept the household running. Thomas arrived 2 weeks after Rosa's birth, bearing gifts and wide-eyed wonder at his niece. "I'm an uncle," he kept saying, like he couldn't quite believe it. "I have a niece, a real, actual niece." "You want to hold her?" Lydia offered, and Thomas backed away like she'd offered him a live snake. "I don't know how. What if I drop her? What if I break her?" "You won't," Elias said, already an expert after 2 weeks of intensive practice. "Here, support her head, keep her secure. There you go." Thomas held his niece with the care usually reserved for explosives, his face a mixture of terror and delight. Rosa looked up at him, seemed to find him acceptable, and promptly fell asleep in his arms. "I think she likes me," Thomas whispered. "Don't let it go to your head," Lydia teased. "She likes everyone right now. Wait until she's 2 and has opinions." The community embraced Rosa with surprising warmth. People who had been judgmental about Lydia and Elias's relationship seemed to soften in the face of an innocent baby. Women brought meals and baby clothes and offered advice, wanted or not. Men stopped by to congratulate Elias, to offer their own war stories of fatherhood, to welcome him into the fraternity of sleep-deprived parents everywhere. But it was the women wearing purple ribbons who moved Lydia most. They came in small groups, these women who had found solidarity and shared suffering, and they each brought something symbolic: a blanket, a toy, a small silver bracelet engraved with Rosa's name. "She's precious," Sarah Mitchell said, holding Rosa with practiced ease. "And she's growing up in a world that's better than the one we had. Not perfect, not nearly, but better. That matters." "It does," Lydia agreed. "And it's because of women like you, women who refuse to stay silent." "Women like Rosa Delgado," Sarah corrected. "Women like Evelyn Carter. Women like you, Lydia. You survived, and you didn't let survival break you. That takes courage most people can't imagine." As Rosa grew, the ranch grew with her. The cattle operation expanded. Lydia's garden became profitable enough that they hired 2 more workers to help process the vegetables and fruits into products they could sell. They built a new barn, larger and more modern. They installed proper plumbing. They saved money, made plans, built a future. Rosa's first word was Dada, much to Elias's delight and Lydia's mock outrage. Her first steps were taken in the garden, lurching from tomato plant to tomato plant with single-minded determination. Her first full sentence at 18 months was "Mama, horse," pointing at the corral with such excitement that they immediately began teaching her to ride. She was fearless, this child born from tragedy and love in equal measure. She ran headlong into life, fell down, got back up, demanded more. She had Elias's dark hair and serious eyes, Lydia's stubborn chin and quick smile. She was curious about everything, questioned everything, accepted nothing at face value. "She's going to be trouble," Miguel predicted, watching 3-year-old Rosa attempt to lasso a chicken. "She's going to be magnificent," Elias corrected, and no one argued. On Rosa's 4th birthday, they held a party that drew people from miles around. Children ran wild through the ranch, playing games and eating cake and making the kind of joyful noise that comes from pure, unfiltered happiness. Adults gathered in groups, talking and laughing. The earlier tensions and judgments mostly faded with time and familiarity. Lydia stood on the porch, watching it all, and felt Elias come up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "Overwhelmingly so. Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life. Our life." "Believe it, you built it. We built it." "We did, didn't we?" She leaned back against him, watching Rosa chase butterflies with single-minded intensity. "Do you ever think about that day in Copper Ridge, when you found me in the dust?" "Sometimes. Not as much as I used to." "What do you think would have happened if you hadn't stopped? If you just kept walking?" "I don't know," Elias admitted, "but I'm grateful every day that I didn't, that I listened to whatever instinct made me step forward instead of away." "I'm grateful too. For that day. For every day since." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Elias Carter. More than I knew it was possible to love another person." "I love you too. You and Rosa. You're my whole world." They kissed, soft and sweet, while around them their friends and neighbors celebrated and their daughter laughed, and the desert wind carried the scent of wildflowers and possibility. That evening, after the guests had departed, and Rosa had been tucked into bed after 3 stories and 2 glasses of water and 1 more urgent trip to the privy, Lydia and Elias sat on the porch in comfortable silence. "Do you think she knows?" Lydia asked. "Rosa. About the women she's named after. About what they sacrificed." "Not yet. She's too young. But we'll tell her. When she's ready. We'll tell her about Evelyn's courage, Rosa Delgado's justice, your survival. We'll make sure she knows she comes from a line of strong women who refuse to be broken. And she'll be proud? She'll be unstoppable." The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and unchanging, bearing witness to all the small human dramas playing out beneath them. In the barn, horses shifted and settled. In the distance, a coyote called, lonely and wild. In the house behind them, their daughter slept, dreaming whatever dreams 4-year-olds dream. And on that porch, two people who had been broken by life and had chosen to heal together sat holding hands, looking at the future they'd built from ashes and pain and stubborn, relentless hope. Years would pass. Rosa would grow up strong and fierce and compassionate, carrying her namesake's legacies in everything she did. She would go to university, something Evelyn had dreamed of but never achieved, and study law, determined to continue the work of protecting the vulnerable. She would return to the territory as a lawyer, an advocate, would fight tirelessly for women's rights, would carry forward the torch that had been lit by tragedy and carried forward by courage. Thomas would marry, would have children of his own, would maintain the close relationship with his sister that had been forged in Philadelphia's grief and strengthened in Arizona's desert. He would visit often, his children growing up alongside Rosa, cousins who were more like siblings, bound by blood and by the stories they were told about the brave women who had made their lives possible. The ranch would prosper, would become known throughout the territory as a place where hard work was valued, where workers were treated fairly, where a woman's voice carried as much weight as a man's, would become a symbol of what was possible when people chose justice over comfort, truth over convenience, love over fear. And Lydia and Elias would grow old together, would face new challenges and new griefs because life always brings both, but would face them together, as partners, as equals, as two people who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light. The town of Copper Ridge would change too. The Evelyn Carter Memorial Act would inspire other reforms, other protections. The culture of silence that had enabled men like Nathaniel Hughes would slowly, painfully begin to crack. It wasn't a revolution, change never is, not really, but it was progress. And sometimes progress is all you can ask for, but that was all yet to come. On this night, under these stars, with their daughter sleeping peacefully and their hands clasped together, Lydia and Elias simply existed in the present moment, in the miracle of survival, in the grace of second chances, in the power of choosing love, even when love seems impossible. Do you ever miss it? Lydia asked suddenly. The before, when things were simpler. No, Elias said without hesitation. That life was quieter, maybe, but it wasn't better. It was just less joy, less purpose, less meaning. I was surviving, not living. You taught me the difference. We taught each other, Lydia corrected. I was surviving too. Barely. We both needed saving, and we saved each other. That's what makes it work. That's what makes it everything. They sat in silence a while longer, then went inside together. Checked on Rosa one last time. She'd kicked off her blankets again, starfished across the bed with the abandon of the very young, and tucked her back in. Stood in the doorway of her room, watching her chest rise and fall with steady breaths, marveling at the life they'd created. She's going to change the world, Lydia whispered. She already has, Elias replied. Changed ours anyway. Made it bigger, brighter, more full of possibility. They went to their own room finally, to the bed they'd shared for over 4 years now, to the space they'd made their own through daily choices and shared dreams. They lay wrapped in each other's arms, listened to the house settle around them, felt the peace that comes from being exactly where you're supposed to be. And if sometimes ghosts still walked these halls, Evelyn's gentle presence, Rosa Delgado's fierce spirit, they were friendly ghosts now, protective, proud of what had been built in their names, glad that their suffering had led, eventually, to healing. I love you, Lydia murmured, already half asleep. I love you too, Elias replied. Always. Outside, the desert stretched vast and silent under infinite stars. Inside, a family slept safe and warm, proof that even the most broken things could be mended, that even the darkest stories could find their way to light, that from the dust of despair could grow something beautiful and strong and absolutely worth fighting for. And in the morning, they would wake and begin again, would face whatever challenges the day brought, would choose each other, choose hope, choose to build instead of break, would teach their daughter through words and actions that she was strong, valued, capable of anything she set her mind to, would honor the women whose names she carried by living fully, loving fiercely, and never ever accepting that the world couldn't be better than it was, That was their promise, their purpose, their prayer. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.